The only thing our music's lyrics to sing along to. And I feel like the way we all dance when the music comes on, we'd definitely be the worst karaoke rendition of whatever song you pick. Although to be fair, I've seen your boy Keith do some karaoke, and he's got a little flair to it. He's not.
I got some pipes, brother. I got some pipes.
Put a little brush on your makeup.
I don't know if I ever told you this, Keith. I definitely told everybody else this. The night I went up there to Denver with you and stayed. I've forgotten your friend's name now that I met up there. Michael, who shout out to Michael and his wife, who I'm also drawing a blank on, but they were great people. Wonderful bar up there. What's the name of their bar? Give them a shout out for the
A Room for Friends. It is in the art district in Denver.
Which is only like 90% as gay as it sounds. It's really it was a great little bar down there, and they did karaoke and all jammed out while I kind of nursed my altitude sickness in the corner and barely participated. And I watched everyone go through the night and get raised exuberance towards their songs and watch some absolute banger of performers, some who were completely unintelligible as far as like the articulation, but still was great to watch people go out there and sing their hearts out and fight it. And I watched Michael and Kiefer bang out 15 songs or so throughout the night, and then get to the end, and they came up with a grand idea, obviously, to close out with a strong song. And they went with Chop Suey by System of the Down. And I'm like, all right, that's interesting. And then I got to watch a 2-hour argument between Kiefer and Michael about which part was the main singer and who was doing the backup. And I watched them waffle back and forth and argue about it, and very deferent to each other, by the way. You seem to be a wonderful pairing together, because most of the time it was never like I should be the lead. It was more like, I like the way you do this, so you should take this position because of this and that. And then they start the song Chop Suey, and both guys drunkenly scream out every single word, whether it's the lead or the backup. Delightful to watch. I quite enjoyed it.
We totally forgot what we had agreed to completely.
The video was great.
The plan changed 18 times, so. Oh, that's right.
Yeah, because I think you sent me the video either that night or in the morning after, and I got a good kick out of like both of them.
I immediately was in stitches because I got to watch them plan it out for 2 hours and then completely throw all those plans to the wayside and mess up.
No plan survives first contact. Military maxim number 1.
Absolutely, dude. But we decimated the enemy, I gotta say.
That's fair. I think you guys took home the belt, or whatever the analogy is. Again, it was in the art district, so it's something gayer than sports analogies. But you guys were the winners of the night, however that works.
We took home the golden butt plug, dude.
Golden butt plug.
Wow, that's a hell of an honor.
Don't worry, we shared.
I only hope that it's a double-sided golden butt plug.
Oh.
Get you a little like Requiem for a Dream, a scene going. And
I don't remember that scene. What are you talking about?
I haven't seen the movie.
Oh, gotcha. Well, it doesn't. At the very end, like, she goes and participates in some very lewd acts for a dose of heroin. And
I'm thinking of the wrong movie.
The old man that looks like Jerry Jones says they should go ass to ass, and it's it's pretty brutal.
Oh, I've heard that reference so many times. That actually makes sense.
Yeah,
it used to be an OK Cupid pickup line back in the day, apparently.
Okay, that's good to know. I didn't
wonder what the batting percentage was on that pickup line.
Probably better than you think, because it kept getting like circled around the internet. Like if you Google ass to ass and OK Cupid, you will find it.
To be fair, the one man I knew who had monstrous success on Tinder without being a super attractive person, that was his strategy. The opening messages were as lewd as you could possibly imagine, to the point where I would turn red in the face just reading them when he'd show them to me. I'm like, I can't believe you said that to a woman. And then come 2:30, the bars would close, and somebody would decide that lewd activity sounded a little bit fun to experiment with. He'd get a phone call.
Honestly, OK Cupid was great back in its like early days when you could literally talk to anybody. You could send a message to someone up in Wyoming, wherever, just talk to them about whatever. And then they kind of got rid of that. I guess maybe some dudes were creeping or whatnot. And suddenly you couldn't have like fun conversations with random strangers anymore. And it just went downhill from there. And
This used to be a country.
it
I
did.
almost chastised you for assuming that men ruined it, and I didn't even get to the sentence out of my mouth before I went, nah, it's probably men that ruined that. Yeah, that's probably correct.
Of course.
Well, you know how those women are, always reaching out and sending requests for dick pics to all of us.
Oh, that happens to you too? Oh, I'm glad that I'm not the only one that just is bombarded by those.
No, dick pics are like jewelry on a girl's birthday. It's supposed to be a surprise.
Oh, well, where do you guys want to start? Welcome to Against the Mob podcast. We are a very serious podcast that talks about very serious things, if you didn't know. Flirt Cheap, thank you for pretty much filling in as like, I don't know, like I know that you have respectfully declined our invitation, but you know, we'll just take you on a rolling we'll take you on a rolling basis week in and week out without actually making you officially part of the show.
Yeah, your company has become so endearing to us that we've decided, even if you're not willing to commit to us, we are willing to be your side podcast. You can come on here whenever you feel like it. When your main podcasts are not treating you well.
Ooh, this thing just broke, it seems like.
Oh, there? Yeah, he's frozen on my screen.
I heard him talk. I don't see him moving.
Oh, there he is.
Nope. And he's back.
Yep, there you are.
No idea what happened. I have full internet, so is it just me that dropped?
Mm-hmm.
It filled me with a great sense of loathing and self-pity to be conceding to you that I'm willing to be your side chick podcast, essentially. And in the middle of that, your phone cut out like you just dropped the call.
He's like, and
I'm already
rejected.
making a concession for your love.
It's like,
why am I not good enough?
Now that you're offering it, I don't want it. He's typical cat behavior.
Look, I just enjoy being guest of honor because it allows me to just dip out and do whatever I want on random weeks when I'm not showing up. It's fantastic.
It's fair.
I can understand that. The pressure of knowing we have a weekly podcast that we barely do any research or prep time for, it weighs heavy on my head for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, I just get to be like, I'm getting on a plane. Sorry. You know?
I actually don't feel like talking to you guys tonight. This is fair enough. Are we going to lose him all night? He just froze
I don't
on my
know.
end.
Yeah, he froze. I could still hear him.
Okay, wait, y'all could hear me the whole time?
Yeah.
Oh, that's embarrassing. All right, well, let's just go on with the show and we'll pretend this isn't going to keep happening. I hope it doesn't.
We'll cross our fingers. Odd. Fair enough. We can move on. We'll get our weekly dose here of your online libertarian check-in or libertarian-esque, I guess, as these two weekly step closer to being Republicans, I guess. But I'm sure everyone who listens to this podcast has been documenting that. Speaking of documenting, I think that's mostly what the subject matters on today. Obviously, much as, and we already covered this probably 2 weeks ago when we had you on here, we knew that there was going to be a PR push, obviously. Trump is a man who likes his name in the media. He's a man who likes PR wins, and he promised that you're going to get sick of winning at this point. So we figured there's going to be a lot of headlines and a lot of quick movement once Trump takes office. And specifically, it seems like everybody is focused on kind of what's going on with our deportations right now and our reimagining of what a border should look like. And myself included, I expected a lot. I don't know that I expected it to be this quick and this many headlines right away. I think even I forgot what it's like to have the energy of Donald Trump running the country.
And, you know, it's fair, too, because even when we say we forgot what it was like, you know, in 2016, there were like 10 million like anchors tied around his cabinet picks, his administrators, all of his department heads. So, I mean, really, this is a new experience for every single one of us. You know, like we all thought like, oh, we'll be able to keep up with his first 100 days. We'll be able to, you know, I'll check in on the news maybe 2 or 3 hours a day. It'll be enough for me to know what's going on. And like the truth is like, it absolutely is not. And there's waves of bureaucrats being fired. There's confirmation hearings. There's pushback against executive orders where they're trying to take it into court. And then they're even like unfiling memorandums to get around these court filings. At the same time, we're getting something like 30 executive orders a day. And fights with Colombia, apparently that happen on the weekend, on Sunday, and are resolved on Sunday night. When's the last time you knew about a government that actually worked on the weekends and at night? Never in the real world, in any administration prior to this one, that whole Sunday thing would have popped up. And today is Wednesday, and there would just barely be like a single committee hearing about it. They wouldn't have done anything. Like there wouldn't have been anything that would have occurred for weeks, maybe even a whole month. And instead that's happening at the same time. There's 50 other pieces of movement right now. And then now they're offering every single government employee to resign by email and receive pay for the rest of the fiscal year till September 30th.
Which is great because I know a lot of them didn't want to go in for their review process. So now they can just do it via email. Get out of the way if you don't want to show up.
I mean, honestly, if you're afraid of being fired or being trimmed as, some excess fat, it's actually not a bad gig for a lot of people. Like if you're actually afraid that, oh no, I'm going to be found not necessary to the government, cool, then take your severance pay and your benefits and roll. It's kind of a win-win, and I don't hate the move at all. It's if you're willing to resign and step away, if you are that easily bought and you don't actually care that much about fighting for your job and being a public servant that you say you are, well, I think that it's a good use of taxpayer dollars. I view it in the same realm as like everybody that said, oh, if Trump wins, I'm going to leave the country. I feel like if he went to Congress and said, I'd like to appropriate so many billions of dollars to relocate everybody that said they were going to leave, I think it would be, you know what I mean? If he's just like, hey, here's $5 billion in the fiscal budget. We'll give everybody who said they're willing to leave, 6 months overseas.
We could do us
a great use of dollars.
Do us a little Baton Rouge, New Orleans population strategy. We just be like, you can move to Greenland as long as you marry a conservative and rehabilitate.
Right. But then it was like, but do you really want to relocate all of the people who said that they, like, if Donald Trump wins, I'm going to leave? Like, do you really want to relocate them to the 51st state of America and skew those demographics and kind of like throw a wrench in it? I think we should just leave them to their own devices. Send them to these European countries they think are so great. Let them go experience you want to talk about racism, dude? You have no idea until you hear Europeans talk about gypsies. You don't know true racism. The hard R carries not nearly as much animosity as they have for gypsies over there. So I think we should leave them to their own devices.
And, Christine Lagarde and the EU did announce that they're willing to accept migrants from the US, which I thought was absolutely hilarious. Because we know that's a big no. And especially since AFD actually just won something in the German Congress today. They're apparently going to roll out some new like anti-migration legislation in Germany because they managed to win that big over there. And this is before they've even had their next like chancellor election, which I think is October of this year. So who knows?
It is fascinating how much it's been worldwide. It's probably a little sweeping, but in Western culture in the last 10 years, as American culture has gone, it seems like that pendulum swing has kind of followed through in Europe too, and at least a lot of the major countries I've seen where there's talk of tires of immigration and the lack of conservation of what the identity of a nation used to be and who they are, and the pressures and maybe it's as simple as, hey, when you open up every single border and just let whoever in without vetting them, you're going to get some horrible repercussions from that. And everybody kind of simultaneously had that reckoning all at once, or is it just that America is the only country that really matters and everybody's looking at us all the time?
I think that I agree with that sentiment, but I think it started in Europe, right? Like, we have to remember that Brexit happened before Donald Trump. And so that right-wing populism was already taking hold in Europe. And anybody that was paying attention could have seen Donald Trump coming. And I was not a conscious observer of politics at that time. Yeah, I was, you know what I mean? I was still ski patrolling. I'm still playing at bars till 3 o'clock in the morning on days I have to go to work at 7, so I was not a utterly responsible and plugged in adult, but
I can't
watching
do any politics talks is going to get away in my drug habits.
Absolutely. And priorities, man. And I had them straight. And in watching
I'm sure you were happier then.
much happier. much happier. I slept so much better in those days. I yearn for that type of sleep. But watching all of this, and I don't know if we want to get into this right now or not, but it's something I've been chewing on, that I feel like we're seeing the repercussions and kind of the dying of this, like the end of history period where liberal democracies will flourish forever and our life is going to be ultimately better than our parents, and that's just going to keep on going and going and going. And we've seen kind of 30 years of this push of the liberal democracy, and now we're starting to experience the consequences of it, and people are rejecting kind of the core principles that really took hold in the late 90s and the early 2000s about, like, this is so good.
We're going to say retarded again. Get over it.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, this is great. Everybody can have as much as they want. Society is good as a you know what I mean? Like, let everybody come in. Everything will just be good. And that sentiment, we rode through the high, but now we're experiencing the crash of that. And it's happening worldwide, especially in the liberal democracy, so to speak. France, Germany, Denmark, England, America, the Scandinavian countries, they've always been like homogenous and racist. So, maybe they're not experiencing as swift as a crash as the others.
Well, I think another issue too is just like data is very prevalent. And so we have access to a lot of information that, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, when the push to open borders a bit more in the West kind of went underway, they didn't really have access to much information. What did they really know? But you either see things like where Sweden, they just stopped documenting the ethnicity of people who were committing crimes. And then you have the other half, which is Denmark, where they document by country of origin. And they have like some pretty expansive charts you can find online outlining every single country's like prevalence of criminality. And surprise, surprise, Japan's at the lowest. Who would have guessed? But when we have this access to this level of data, I think it's kind of hard for there not to be some level of pushback, especially when you compare to like what gets promised and what gets put forward in the media. You see a boat full of migrants, the media tell you there's doctors, astronauts, and microphysicists coming over. And, there are a handful in there, no doubt, but, the vast majority are not that. The vast majority are not really integrating too well. And you're running into issues where the reality that people experience is very different from what was promised. I think it'd be one thing if what we were promised was close enough to reality to the point where maybe there would be less of a pushback, because people would be saying like, well, this is what we expected. We knew this was going to happen. But I think a lot of people are all kind of looking around and saying, hey, wait a minute, none of this matches what I was expecting. I think that's where the pushback comes from. And also, like, Le Pen was also before Trump. I believe the election where she had the runoff with Macron was early 2016. Would have been March. I was live trading that, actually, and I got blown the fuck out.
Have you ever considered that low crime rate in Japan maybe has a correlative factor to the number of ninjutsu practicers there, and that maybe we're just not seeing the crime because of the sneakiness of said ninjas?
I imagine there's probably a line of best fit showing criminality and presence of ninjas in countries, of which Japan is probably like at the very bottom of that, like most ninjas, least crime. So
I think, to be fair to anybody who's not completely ignorant of Asian culture, I think ninjas are more of a Chinese thing, aren't they? And samurai was the Japanese tradition.
Ninjas are Japanese, man.
It is Japanese. Okay. All right. I showed my own ass for no reason, I guess.
I guess you're not weeb enough. You'll pass through the first round and won't have to dig the dishes with the rest of the weebs. It's like I was supposed to watch anime. It's like dig the dick, weeb.
Well, even though we were just talking about kind of the way the West is dealing with migration, like we could pivot back and talking about how we're dealing with it now, at least with Trump in charge. Because I think many people were expecting deportations to happen, but they're still kind of shocked at the level at which they're happening. You have people on the left who are shocked that, like, whoa, this is not what we expected. You had people on the right who are like, this isn't what we're expecting. I wanted 500,000 a day. We're only at 1,500 or whatever. But still, it is kind of impressive because
I'm still hearing Spanish on the bus. What the fuck's going on?
One thing that's kind of wild is like they have most wanted things that they put out. I believe it was ICE or DHS who had like a most wanted list of people who are here illegally and also committing crimes. And Trump has only been president for like 8 days, 9 days. And of the 39 people on the list, 14 have been arrested in the first 9 days of Trump. And I checked this yesterday. I don't even know. It's probably changed since then. 4 of the top 10 have also been apprehended as of yesterday, which is kind of wild because, like, on the one hand, it kind of implies that either like, oh, this is actually really easy to solve, or 2, they already knew where everybody was and they just weren't doing anything about it.
That's the biggest one. There's been a lot of numbers jump out to me that kind of make me do that, where it's like, oh, they really were. I kind of thought it might be right-wing Republican propaganda, but there seems to have been a concerted effort not to address the problem at all. The fact that it was that easy to nab up, 4 of the top 10 of your most wanted within a week. Like, did you guys, your detective work that good that it took you 1 week of serious work? Even if it was just that, that's crazy. But it feels to me like you guys kind of knew where they were.
Yeah, it's got to be the only real thing there. And when you look at this kind of like migration economy as a whole, there's a lot of money behind it. And you have to wonder if maybe there are some entities who might be, making political donations who have an interest in this not being solved. I mean, there's been a number of NGOs that are involved in this. According to, I wish I had it pulled up here. Oh, wait, I do. According to the Washington Times, this is a $20 billion a year industry in 2022. And apparently the cartels were only making $2 billion a year off of that. The other $18 billion a year is going to who knows. I personally have no idea, but I've got to imagine that not all of the coyotes are cartel affiliated, and that maybe there's some official entities involved too. Because it wasn't that long ago that you'd find random container ships where there'd be like, oh, we've got 1 container full of migrants who are shipped over here. You got to imagine these companies that are doing the shipping aren't just completely ignorant of what's on their boats. The people filing the insurance and the bill of lading, they're not completely ignorant of what's on each one of these containers. And I think there's a lot of money going around to a lot of institutions, especially ones here that are resettling migrants, because, I mean, you can get paid a lot through government grants just to resettle migrants. I mean, they didn't all end up in Springfield, Ohio on accident. They didn't just decide. It's not, there's a gigantic Somali community in Fargo. They weren't all just like, ooh, North Dakota. That reminds me of the Somaliland.
Right. That's just like the homeland.
There's just a lot of money here. And I think a lot of people were, I'd say, interested in the problem never solving itself.
Mm-hmm.
And,
you're probably right. I mean, even at a much smaller incentive level, as someone who's worked in restaurants for a decade and a half, when people would show up when I managed places and I needed to hire somebody and they had questions about, hey, I've acquired some paperwork that's not exactly mine, I would, hey, I don't want to hear that. I want to hire a dishwasher today. So that is, for us, this conversation didn't happen and I have plausible deniability. I'm sure you see the same thing. And especially when you're filling a shipping container full of human beings who pay, I think you showed us a number that said people were paying as much as $100,000 to cross the border.
I mean, yeah, I was shocked.
Ooh, you can get a lot of money if you're cut of that 100,000 for each head that's in that shipping container. And all you have to do is say, well, I didn't know what they were shipping. I just knew that it had to have holes in the top and they needed dog water holes.
Occasionally open it up and leave water, but I never looked inside.
It's definitely a good point. And for people who are listening who might not believe it, I was just out of curiosity, I was looking to refresh my own numbers about how much people were paying to be smuggled across the border, because I had previously assumed it was $4,000 to $20,000 per person. That's how much you pay if you're from Mexico or Central America. The further away you are, the more it costs. So if you're from South America, that's $20,000 to $30,000. If you're trying to get here from overseas, They were apprehending a bunch of people from China who had paid anywhere from 50 to 100,000. They had interviewed this woman who'd spent $80,000 just to be smuggled across, and it was a bit mind blowing. I had trouble really believing the numbers were true because they don't really make sense in my head. But this
it
woman
feels
said,
like if you could come up with $100,000 right now, you're doing better than I am. So it's like, why are you trying so desperately to get to the United States? Seems like you're doing fine.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
obviously that's not the only metric of what your life is in this other country, but
that's a really
that's a
good
lot of
point,
money
though.
to come up with off the top of your head, you know?
It's a really good point.
Like if you told me I needed to come up with $100,000 by tomorrow, I'd be in trouble. It'd be difficult.
This woman who was interviewed said that her entire extended family had came together and pooled money for her to go, which is kind of a wild thing, but also kind of matches some like Chinese family dynamics. She was from China. They don't really have a lot of debt. They usually pool money together to buy real estate. And that's their primary way of investing. But the real estate market has kind of been in a weird bit of collapse since Evergrande for the last 3, 4, 5 years. So, I guess if you want to do anything for money, you send someone to America and have them just send money back to you. Like, hey, go to America, live in a flap house with 15 people, save all of your money and send it back to the family. And it's maybe a better investment than real estate from the perspective of like a Chinese national. I don't really know. But then again, the other reason that you're paying is because your documents aren't good and you can't get through customs. Because obviously, like, if you could just walk up to the border and show them your ID and come in, that's what you would do. But, genuinely people don't do these things either because their documents aren't good enough or they want to have like a long-term stay. And under the previous administration, if you just got apprehended without like proper entry documents, you got a court case and you got released in the US. And the court case was like 2028, 2029, like 5 years in the future. So you got 5 years to make money, send it back home. Maybe it's a better investment than Chinese real estate, buying basically serf labor in the US. I don't know.
You say you have 5 years, but I mean, what's to make you show up to that court date after 5 years and you've already been here and established yourself and gotten a job? If there's nobody as in under the former administration, if there's nobody that's even searching for you, I mean, that 5 years is not even, it's a suggestion at best.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's kind of what people bank on is just, and also, there's always the political push for amnesty, which is something that gets talked about. Like if you talk to, I have friends who are Democrats and they're kind of like, why don't we do amnesty for the ones who have been here for a little bit? And it's like, it sets up the wrong incentives in terms of like what people end up doing in the future. Cause then, your future is only set around just evading and showing up and hoping amnesty occurs some point while you're here. Which right. I think
it worked out for my uncle that went over there. Why wouldn't I take the same path?
Yeah, absolutely. But it's weird to think about because there is, obviously there's the amount of death that occurs on the border with the way that like the previous system has incentivized it. So suddenly having that like just shut down basically overnight after we had 4 years of them pretending like, oh, we're trying our best. We don't know what to do. Kind of wild. And also, I don't know if y'all saw a couple days ago, they found something like 80,000 missing children that have just been kind of lost. And that was an interesting one because they've known about them for, I think, since 2023. There was a whole Senate oversight hearing on this. And there was 200 something thousand children that had been brought across the border without their parents. So this is what is called an unaccompanied minor. And of these 200,000, only like 30,000 ended up in like a proper house for a kid. A lot of them just ended up in like weird labor situations, which is already wild enough. You're bringing over illegal migrants to work, but that's not enough. You got to bring kids. So, they're starting to like bust places. They found like a whole hotel with underage staff, like underage, like migrant staff that had just been brought over as unaccompanied minors, the kids in cages. And they made a big deal about releasing them, but no one said where they were going. And they've all been going to either horrible labor conditions or
at
like
best
slavery in sex trafficking or something like that.
I was about to say that's the one that, I mean, not that it's great to be using child slave labor essentially, or serfdom maybe is a better term for it since they're probably not completely chattel necessarily. But I mean, we know for a fact that like the amount of sex slaves in this country is a greater number than chattel slave was at the height of our slave system back in the old days. I mean, that was an eye-opening number that we got to hear on this podcast a long time ago with hangings for pedophiles on here. It's weird to me that there's not more of a concern, and you never hear that from the pro-immigration side. Like, there's no like, yes, we're coming down too heavy on immigration, but they did find 80,000 children. It's amazing that people can completely ignore that. I mean, I even had somebody passing conversation about it today who was, clearly left-leaning, and I was kind of saying my piece that I said last time on here about, I am very concerned about the way they're going to go about it, because they really want to get the numbers up, and they're going to go after a lot of these people who are mostly paying their taxes because they're working under either a temporary visa or a fake social security number where the taxes are being pulled out by payroll and going into the system. And it's like, those, to me, those are the least of my concern. There are people in this country who are horrific things are happening. And especially like that, like, dude, we have 80,000 child laborers that we found. And those are the ones who got off light compared to their compatriots who are in much worse situations right now, who are literal sex slaves and will never get to leave a normal life, even if they are broken out of those chains. Like, it's a amount of psychological and physical repercussions to that kind of lifestyle that I don't know if anybody ever really truly gets over.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder too about the pro-immigration, like all of the people that willfully ignore this. Either like you could either, I just never took the time to actually look into it, right? So it's either just like complete ignorance or it's willful, ignoring of it. And
that was, real quickly, just to cut you off. Sorry to cut you
go
off.
ahead.
That was what I didn't get to because I trailed off. Was that was the line I got hit with was, yeah, it's ridiculous they're doing all these deportations. None of them are criminals. It's like, well, there is a truth in the middle here. But, to say that while ignoring that earlier today, I just read that we found 80,000 children that were unaccompanied,
It blows my mind.
There's a criminal in there somewhere.
Yeah, you're right. And it probably, and probably the worst part about, the worst part about this is it's probably like a amalgamation of all of this $20 billion, this $20 billion a year industry of these NGOs, relocating, immigrants, all, you know what I mean? It's probably this ugly, perfect storm that just allows for everybody to maximize their profit, use up humans and children as their products. And it's just like, I mean, the only word I have is like evil. It's the only word that comes to my mind. Now, maybe not everybody in the cog is an evil person, right? There's probably some ignorant people that have no idea, and if they found out, but I imagine that if you really started to dig into the mechanics of it, everyone probably has an idea, even though you might not know the details of what's going on. You have a vague understanding of what's in those
shipping containers. Sure did have a lot of children in it. Well, I guess it's time to deposit this $20,000.
Yeah, so it's I don't know, it's a really messed up situation, and I don't understand why people advocate for an open border just on any level. It makes no sense to me, and because you do get these ramifications, like these are primary, secondary, tertiary effects of immigration policy, which makes no sense. So,
well, I think you hit it on the head there. It's a combination of empathy and ignorance. It's looking at the problem only from the compassionate side of like, well, why do I have a right to this land just because I was born here?
Because we won it. That's why.
Have the because we conquered it.
All right, it's not stolen. It's conquered. Let's get that right.
Right of conquest. But it's like it comes from a place of compassion, where in their eyes, every immigrant is a person who's looking for a better life, and all they want is to get out of some unfortunate situation and come to America and be good, upstanding American citizens. But you do have to have a high level of, I'm not reading anything on the other side about immigration to buy into that opinion. You have to really be willfully ignorant to the horrors of it. So I guess that would be it, is you put your political blinders on and you say, hey, I'm on the left, and everybody who wants to deport people is absolutely in violation of human rights and can't be dealt with. And I don't know. There's a part of that, I guess, too, is there's this, especially as of late with kind of the woke movement, there's certainly a sentiment of everybody who's truly evil has to have blonde hair and blue eyes, So if they're not white people, then they didn't really mean to sell all these children to sex trafficking. They're just trying to make money for their families,
They're just trying to get back to 200 years of, the patriarchy and the system keeping them down. They're just a developing nation trying to get theirs.
That does concern me too. I don't know if this is a perfect analogy for it, but I like to harp on the kind of the feminization of culture and the repercussions of it. And it's, again, not to say that feminine or masculine is preferable in either scenario, but there are just things that come along naturally with being a more masculine minded society or a more feminine minded society. And one of those things is maybe standing on your soapbox on sentiment that you haven't really read all that much about, that the feelings take precedent over the facts, and it's time to stand up for all these disenfranchised minorities and make sure that they don't get punished by the terrible white man, even if the repercussions put upon you by other minorities of your class are 10 times more horrific in reality. At least you're not being oppressed by the patriarchy.
Yeah, it could be some form of in-group preference in some way. For instance, there's a concept in certain bad neighborhoods that you just don't snitch on people in your neighborhood, regardless of what they're doing, even though they might be doing direct harm to you, your family, or your just ability to enjoy being outside of your own home without worrying about like shots coming in your way or people harassing you or young men asking you where you're from. This urge just to not snitch comes from this kind of like a weird perverted in-group preference where instead of like personally, like my in-group is just people who think like me and believe like me. That's 100% my in-group. And they're the only people I really care about.
That's a good subtle way to say white people.
Does that mean I finally made it? Mama, I'm finally home.
In-groups can be physical too. But I think one thing that's interesting here is that as a political class, I would say like the centrists and Republicans have always had kind of like an out-group preference in the fact that they've been willing to extend certain things. Whereas I'd say the left wing has always been in-group in terms of thought. Like if you think like me and believe like me, you're my in-group. And we're watching like the right wing slowly turn into that exactly. Like what I'm saying is a very leftist perspective of like, if you think like me and believe like me, you're in my in-group. Nobody in the right wing would have ever said that 5 years ago. They would harass you, defend your right to say it, even though I might disagree, all that like cuck language. And all of that's like slowly going away. And we're getting to a point now where like the right wing is moving towards deportations, for instance, which is going to be like just a massive logistical lift on its own. Even once you get beyond like just the ethical thing of us deciding that like we're going to do something hard that might hurt people, just because it's like for the best for our own like people, and by our own people I mean people who think and believe like me. Again, when we consider and look at the logistics ahead of us, it's quite interesting because we saw Colombia push back over the weekend and say like, hey, we're not accepting your flights. And then eventually they crumbled. But there was like a little 5-hour period where I was like quite worried that they wouldn't crumble. Because I mean, what the Colombian president did, he sent over one plane. After we had sent over a plane, he's like, you have them in handcuffs. They're Colombian citizens, blah, blah, blah. And, his initial solution was like, hey, we're going to use my plane instead for deportations, which some people thought like, oh, cool, he's already collapsed, but he hadn't yet. He wanted to control the schedule of deportations and the manner in which they occurred. And, when we were doing 800 combined arrests and what's the other word they used? Detainers a day, that might amount to one flight to Colombia a day. But we've recently ramped up to 1,500 a day. And at some point, we've got to get to like 10, 20,000 a day. And there's a number of countries in both South and Central America that are going to have to completely adapt themselves to accepting 5 to 6 flights of full commercial flights a day of migrants that we have arrested and we are repatriating back to them. And I don't think
anti-immigrating.
Essentially, they're going to have to deal with the same kind of thing we had to deal with, where 10,000 people a day were crossing our border, or 15,000, I think, was like the highest we got to on average, which is insane. And for a country like Colombia, which is not anywhere near as developed, both bureaucratically, administratively, and just infrastructure wise, for them to accept 1,000 people a day, that might be too much for them. And I do wonder if we're going to see some form of organized pushback from like Central America, South America. I don't know if Haiti is even capable of pushing back, but like Haiti is another one. There's
what are you going to hurt dropping some more Haitians back in Haiti? That's not like,
what are they going to do? Throw rocks at our plane?
they're just on the cusp of risking it, of fixing it all right now. And we're going to mess it up by sending some Haitians back.
I don't think it would make a difference to Haiti in general, which is a wild thing to say. From stories I've heard from people who have been there and have experienced like on the ground, and like they were part of like a mission to Haiti, was that it was just complete hell when they were outside of the gates of where they were staying. And I say that word, and I think it doesn't even really come across. Like they talked about the smell of like rotting human flesh just being kind of present in a lot of different places. At night, the sounds they heard coming from the city was scaring them, both in terms of like the sounds of violence, and also there was some weird chanting and drumming that was going on. And their guide said that there was some sort of religious ceremony, but it involved violence. And I don't really know too much more, but I'm trying to imagine a country like that getting 500 people on a plane in a day. Like, does it matter? Right. I have no idea. But Nicaragua, Honduras, it'll probably matter to them. Mexico, it might matter if we remain in Mexico. Is Mexico going to accommodate that? Because I don't know how many people are still coming. There's estimates that there's like 400 to 700 people still coming a day, which is a gigantic decrease. But still, if they're all required to remain in Mexico, that's a big burden for Mexico to take on. Over the course of a month, that's several thousand people. Over the course of a year, it's tens of thousands of people. I don't know where Mexico puts them. We just announced we have a 30,000 person facility in Guantanamo Bay now as well that we're going to be using for migrants, but it's all not enough. Our logistics are not capable of remigrating to the rate that we need to do it. And it kind of makes you look back at a certain person from World War II and ask yourself, how did he do it? It's brilliant news. How did he do it?
I didn't know we were going to get to the
Holocaust. You've been banned from using the calculator app.
We don't have the trains necessary for this immigration problem we have. We gotta up the
at
tracks.
At our current pace, we will not even outpace Obama for his deportations. He had 3.5 million deportations as president. We're going to have to ramp things up to a crazy amount.
Don't forget to say thank you for the good things Obama gave you, conservatives. It's always sarcastic thanks, Obamas.
Well, I mean,
I do wonder that. I had that exact thought, and I hadn't really. My head's been spinning trying to keep up with American politics, but I do wonder. I mean, at some point, if that border actually gets secured, with the number of people that come through Mexico to get into this country, even not being from Mexico, just that is the port of entry for the most people into this country. I guess actually ships is number one, but the Mexico is the number one border to be crossed. I mean, to your point, like at some point, hey, all these people have come into Mexico to go into America, and now there's no entry to America. So what do we do? And what do we close our border to people coming in? Because at some point it's like, hey, we can't just take this massive overflow that was supposed to be America's immigration problem.
Yeah, it really does make you wonder all of the trickle down. I mean, not even trickle down effects, the immediate effects of it, right? Is there some sort of coordinated effort down the road of all these South and Central American countries to, like we'll just stand together and do what we can against the big beast that is America? What's Mexico end up doing? Do they adjust their internal politics to then fall in line with America? Or, do they end up in kind of like the Latin America block? It's wild to think of how much logistics are actually needed. And it makes you wonder if Americans actually have the stomach for it. to actually go through and to see it's to its conclusion the way that we say that, right? It's like, oh, we want deportations. Like, do we actually want deportations? It's like, I remember we were talking on this podcast and Kiefer was like, I want to see the pictures of, of the sad students being yanked out. I still remember I was listening to Verkanish one day and this guy got on there. He's like, I want them all deported. I want their moms. I want their grandmas. I want their dogs. I want everyone deported. And then the next guy got on and Michael's like, please restore faith in my please restore my faith in this conversation. And he's like, I agree with 95% of the last caller. And he goes, okay, what's the 5% you disagree with? He goes, the dogs can stay.
I'm a Chihuahua fan.
And I wonder, what are the long-term effects of it? Because we've seen in the short term, right? It seems like, call it Trumpian diplomacy, where it's not Teddy Roosevelt speak softly and carry a big stick. It's yell into the Twitter sphere and carry a rocket launcher. And that's kind of what we're seeing. And it worked, at least this time. And it makes you wonder, how many times does that work? How long will people put up with it? Will it just go on for 4 years because they don't want to deal with the repercussions? I don't know. There's so many unknowns of this.
And just the which, I mean, is an overall maybe statement on the sentiment that, hey, you're about to find out what an efficient government is really like now that we're trimming the fat. And a lot of conservatives are like, yeah, I can't wait for this super efficient. But there is part of me that goes, guys, you know what the government really likes to do is start wars and grow its own power. And if you have an efficient, streamlined government, you might just see an efficient streamline of everything you hate about government. And same thing with this border. Like right now, it seems like a lot of things everybody's been cheering for to happen are happening on the conservative right. And it seems like he's really following through with a lot of promises. But Trump's looking for this PR win. He's bringing the hammer down hard. I know I've mentioned to you guys at one of the, and I won't mention the name of the entity I work for, but they had a visit from an ICE agent. I think I said raided in the text message. As I got more information, it sounded more like it was kind of a touching base and seeing if we can go talk to some people in the kitchen sort of thing rather than a raid. But
we got working back there.
It is, right.
Looking around the corner. Huh?
Yeah, they scream La Migra into the front of the kitchen and they have a giant net out back.
It's like, can you guys say Walmart in the back real fast?
But there's, as we see, and it's great that we're seeing these, large names that we're really interested in catching, and the children, 85,000 children, huge positive wins. But how long before they stop running out of easy wins they had lined up that they've already done their research on? They've looked up where they're going to find these people that, we know there's some children that the Democrats are absolutely ignoring. These morons are going to give us this huge PR win. We can go get 4 of our top 10 list, all that. Once they run out of those easy wins, we're going to start seeing the stuff that's a little more on the borderline of like acceptability, or the borderline of desire for even the people on the fervent right that want to deport everybody, that are like, ooh, I didn't know you were coming for my neighbors, that have been here, that work on the farm with this guy, and their kid goes to my kid's school. And I didn't know it was going to be those people that were getting deported. And those are going to be the easy targets, because those are the people that are in the system, that are, if you're going and clocking in somewhere every day with a fake social security number, how long before they start seeing these social security numbers and going through that route and going, wait, why is this social security number being used in Texas when this person died in Wisconsin 7 years ago? Or why is this, this lady's widow's working in a completely different state? What's going on? How is it possible that this numbers? And they're going to end up grabbing people who are of the variety that are not causing issues, that are part of communities that have been here working and paying their taxes. And it's going to start pulling at heartstrings a little bit more when we get to the nitty gritty of who's being deported. And especially as Kiefer kind of alluded to, hey, we got some big numbers to get to. We're not on pace right now. This isn't yet a win. We got to deport more people. So you will start seeing, I'm worried, the ugly head of the deportation side, where you start maybe seeing the parties that you're not all that interested in being deported necessarily, or just overstepping in the fervor of getting everybody out of this country as fast as possible to hit certain numbers.
Yeah, it's certainly something we need to think about, especially like the emotional core of what will eventually happen. Because it's one thing to go after illegal aliens. It's another to eventually go after people who have like permanent residency or some form of valid visa, which I think might happen because there was the executive order, I think yesterday or today, to go after anti-Semites and deport them. And if you dig into it, it allows for deportation of people who are anti-Semitic and have visas or permanent residency as well. And it's one of those things where, again, it's like an easy win because most everybody is like, oh, well, you can get rid of those people. They're kind of like undesirables in some sense. But we do have to consider the fact that there is a possibility that, it might be, say you have a friend who has a green card now and like maybe in the past they did some shady shit.
Yeah, and they just have some very reasonable opinions on Israel.
Well, even beyond that, like maybe they fudged some stuff on a work visa 4 years ago or something, and we get to a point where we're going after someone like that who is, on the up and up now, a friend of yours, somebody it might be the kind of thing we also end up having to look in the eye and being like, well, this is a part of the cost of what's happening. And, can we accept that? Can we also like live in the world where we might try and like save our friend because we know them and we believe they're a good person while still also being supportive of ultimately these policies? And I think on the broader scale, one of the ways that Democrats will end up winning is if they say something like, these deportations, they're actually not that bad, but we do want to make sure we save a portion of people. I think that's the easiest way to get a good chunk of the centrists and part of the indecisive right over. If they said like, okay, no, you guys were right. Criminals can go, child rapists can go, people who are trafficking can go. But we'll look and see for some sort of path for people who are in kitchen staff. They might end up winning quite a bit of voters. They won't win me over personally, but I mean, it's certainly a path that they could consider taking, because ultimately, like, there's going to be like a lot of knock-on consequences. A lot of industries that maybe are like gray industries where people already feel like they're paying a lot for certain things, but the labor in that industry is being held down by, let's say, an illegal workforce of serfs that have been imported from another country and can't really leave. And, when you say it that way, it has a certain ethical characteristic that says like, hey, we got to stop this. But on the other hand, too, people complain and say things like, oh, your tacos can get more expensive. The left says things like, who's going to clean your toilet? Who's going to like mow your grass? As derivative as that stuff sounds, it is kind of true to some extent. And I think ultimately, like, prices in all of these industries have to come up. We have to watch real estate end up kind of like coming up empty. We have to watch people who are struggling to find renters because previously, like, the bottom end of real estate might have been held down by migrants living 6 people to a house, 11 people to a house.
Yeah, I got a 1-bed, 1-bath. It's perfect for 14 immigrants.
We laugh, but that stuff happens. There was something that's popped in my Twitter feed. So it's not like news, but it was some like colonial house in like Cleveland. Colonial is the wrong word, but it's like 150 years old. And they knocked down basically all of the walls that weren't load bearing and then put up a bunch of like privacy curtains. And they had 20 Haitians inside the house. It got busted. The people got like moved out of the house, and like the whole property is just kind of ruined because you can't really move people in after that was happening because these 20 Haitians were in this house that didn't have a functioning bathroom. Where are these people going? And according to the story, they had like knocked out holes in the wall and were just kind of like pooping into the crawl space between like the wall and like the outer wall, which again, I don't know anything about it, but just it sounds like the house is ruined. And that's kind of a silly story, but there's a lot of other properties that maybe
if you wait long enough, it's just the opposite of quickcrete. It's just like a long form concrete that eventually adds structural integrity to the building. Not a construction expert, full disclosure there.
Of course. But this is part of that industry, that $20 billion a year thing. Because the guy who is renting this to them, obviously he knows what's going on. And he's probably getting paid by an NGO to rent it out. He's probably getting paid per person, which is why he stuffed 14 of them into the house, or 20, however. Mm-hmm. So, you might have a 3-bedroom house. You knock down on the walls. You're like, do I rent it to Americans for $1,500 a month? Or do I rent it to Haitians? This NGO is going to pay me $500 a head. I can make $7,000 a month. In 6 months, I don't care what happens to the house. I've got my money out of it. And I think you see a lot of people who are making these kind of awful financial choices that are to the detriment of everybody involved, just because the money machine is tossing them money for it.
Yeah.
And go for it.
And hard to avoid. I mean, I mean, as you're saying that, I'm like, Jesus Christ, I need to get a rental property and knock all the fucking walls out of it. That's some good money right there.
In fact, dude, there's some good money to be made that I'm not getting a slice of.
It's a strong incentive, and it's hard to, on an individual level, like, how easy is it when you have something like $2 million you could be making in the next couple of years off of just doing something? And you're like, well, they're here already. It's not like those Haitians are going back to Haiti if I don't buy this place and rent it out for them. At least they got a roof over their head. And they have privacy curtains. That's probably way nicer than what they had in Haiti anyway. So
it's one of the reasons why a lot of the Haitians ended up in weird small towns that no one had ever heard of in like Pennsylvania, Ohio, and whatnot. Because people just went through Rust Belt and bought up a bunch of property that had been foreclosed from 2008 that was not livable and knocked down the walls. So, you could buy some piece of crap from government auction for like $40K in some of these like blighted areas and then turn around and in like 3 months of rent, you've made your money. You get to be basically a slumlord. We joke about how they all end up in these like random towns and they're not anywhere near the port, but like this is ultimately the mechanism that gets them out there.
It's funny to think you sell a house to a guy and you're like, oh, thank God somebody bought that house in this neighborhood to start help revamping it and put some money back into it. And only the demo crew shows up and you're like, what are they demo?
Where's
knocking
the
walls out?
Where's the renovation crew? That's weird.
When's the tile guy going to show up? It seems like they really are stalling out on the
They're
redesign.
skipping a few steps. It makes me wonder, and I wonder what y'all's take on this is, because there have been the overreactions to this, where essentially they're equating American immigration policy with that of the Nazis, right? They're saying like, oh, well, this is how you end up on the right side of history, as if like, you know what I mean? They're missing the part where, instead of like putting them on a plane and taking them to their home country, they're sending them to gas chambers. You know what I mean? There's that little detail that's missing from this. But I do wonder in the future how this will be studied, right? Will this be studied as like, oh, this is an effective way to get your immigration problem under control? And yeah, sure, you had to crack a few eggs, but overall the omelet was made and America's better for it. I'm just really curious about this, and I'm not buying into the like, oh, this is how you end up on the right side of history, right? Because we're not gassing, you know what I mean? There's no concentration camps. We're not gassing anybody. There's no final solution. There's no Wannsee conference here. Like, oh, let's just get all the Colombians and we'll just take their jewelry and their watches and, crank on the ovens. That's not happening. But I do wonder how this will be studied in a political sense, but also just kind of like in a human sense, because it's easy to think about the policy when it doesn't affect you, or when you start thinking about it in the abstract. But then, like we were talking about, all of a sudden the person that you like, somebody that somebody that you consider part of your community, is now nabbed up in this. I just wonder about like, how are we going to feel about it 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, 6 months down the road, and be like, like, did we really need to do that? Are we okay? And I don't have the answer to it. I'm just curious about like how we're going to look back on what's going on.
I think the answer, normally people would say like the victor writes history, but in this case, I think it's going to be really dependent on what the rest of the Western world does. Like, for instance, Denmark is already, one of their like anti-migration laws they put was there's a racial cap on neighborhoods in Denmark now. So you can't have more than like 30% minorities in any neighborhood in Denmark, which is kind of a wild solution. But like, I guess
makes a lot of sense though. The tipping point. I mean, Revenge of the Tipping Point. Malcolm Gladwell talks about it. You can't have too much of any minority in one neighborhood, because then everyone else leaves. But go ahead.
Yeah, and obviously their main goal there is integration. They figure if you keep the minority population low, they're more likely to learn the language, integrate, learn culture, blah 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 blah. But then you have AFD. They've just won their like anti-migration policies, and we'll get to see whatever those are. That was today. Whenever France finally reforms their government, if the National Front or Le Pen's party wins, what are they going to end up doing? You're looking around some of our other countries as well. You've Italy, you've got Hungary, you've got Poland. They're all fairly anti-migrant. Whenever Trudeau's replacement gets announced, it's possible that Poliver, whoever the other dude is, a conservative, he might win. They might also have some policy as well. So, if American policy is viewed in the context of like, oh, everybody did it, then I think it might be viewed in a very different context than if it's just like, well, we tried and all of our allies rose up against us and they said, how dare you? You can't. You must keep those Nicaraguans out of Pennsylvania or wherever they are. So who knows?
Really good point.
It's interesting too. I saw a clip the other day of the president of Poland or whatever they call their leader. I don't pay attention to other countries. But he had a gentleman there with him at his border, and they're kind of just stalking around and watching people approach the border, trying to immigrate into the country illegally. And you hear him in the woods, and he's talking about the grand conspiracy of, how these groups are all organized and somehow they're getting here, with a lot of equipment, and how are they able to amass this what would be a great sum of money to acquire all of this stuff that they're approaching our very secure border in and trying to break through. It's interesting how much of this, and I probably need to dig deeper into it myself, but as you mentioned, like investment from NGOs and large groups that are looking to force immigrants essentially onto different countries, or at least maybe in lighter terms to financially encourage immigration to countries that aren't otherwise open to the idea. I don't know. I guess I'm just broaching that to see if you guys have any insight that I haven't heard of on it. Who are these people and why are they so interested in investing in forcing immigration onto places like Poland that obviously are not interested in it?
I think the easy answer is they're people that are interested in making money. Yeah. If you set up a financial incentive to do anything, there will be a certain portion of the population that says, yep, I'll hop into that. And if you get to, like relocating people into areas that they may not want to go and may not want them, well, you throw enough federal funds, international aid behind it, you will find somebody that will do that. And I think like for the most basic level, it's just a basic incentive pattern. The second one, which I don't believe, is that they're part of a grand conspiracy of the globalists to just disrupt the Western world and make sure that the white man falls. I don't believe that, but I know that in some circles that argument would be made.
And I mean, in the case of Poland, to steelman a little bit, like, what's the incentive? They're not taking immigrants. They're not interested in changing their demographics. They don't want it. So, like, where's the financial benefit in paying shit tons of money to drop people off at Poland's border and tell them to try to get across that fence? I don't know that I have any explanation other than somebody's trying to change the demographics of Poland or essentially destabilize it. It's like, not to be the conspiracy theorist, but it's like, what else do you point to?
And let me be fair about this, like, destruction of the Western world by bringing in the brown man, right? That's hyperbole, but I think that there is incentive for a number of different organizations and entities to change demographics. If you start talking about long-term,
giant real estate entities,
yeah,
like
housing,
that's a simple incentive. Like, yeah, I'd love to see 7 million immigrants come into this country
right?
next year because I
like if you're an NGO whose job it is to help relocate people into a country that may or may not want them, and you can team up with somebody that is going to try to find housing for these people or has a food program to feed them. You know what I mean? Like, it gets pretty profitable pretty quick, I imagine, if you know the right levers and avenues to navigate.
You just got to find rich, bleeding heart liberals in whatever country you're going to, and hey, you guys want this place to be browner, right?
Or did you buy them off with a cut? Yeah.
And I would also say, like, a good chunk of this is a function of the whole, like, communist march through the institutions. which was just a concept in I guess the 70s and 80s of ways of kind of integrating into U.S. government and controlling the levels of power at all levels. What I just dropped in the chat here, just our private chat for people who are listening, someone made a little like GitHub search tool that allows you to search government grants to NGOs in the U.S. over the last several years by title. I've just dropped one in here, a title search for resettlement. And you can see just how much NGOs in the U.S. were getting to resettle unaccompanied minor children in specific areas around the U.S. And some of these numbers are a bit mind blowing. I don't know if y'all have looked into any of them.
I'm looking at them right now.
Yeah, 26 million for 125 kids. That's a lot of money for 125 kids.
I'll take 125 kids on for that kind of money. I'll figure it out.
Yeah, no, it's wild. And there's even some smaller stuff that still doesn't make sense. You can get $8 million just for having 35 beds available. They say long-term for kids. I don't know how long-term is, but that's a lot of money that can be made by just applying, creating a little 501c, and then doing the work of actually like funneling and shuffling these people from the border to whichever random city happens to fit your financial models the best. And then you can just be a board member on your 501c for 150K a year, 200, 300K a year. And maybe you only work 2 or 3 times a year, and then the rest you just paying someone to oversee whichever derelict property you bought and put up tarps and a couple beds in to qualify for this grant. It's almost free money for anybody involved who wants to take advantage of this system. And
hey, Jose, I wanted to talk to you about overhead. It seems like we're spending a lot on privacy curtains. Are you guys wearing them out too quickly there? Does everybody need their own quadrant of privacy? Can we pair them up a little bit?
Poland probably doesn't have anything like this set up, but I do wonder because Poland is part of the EU. Obviously, they use the euro currency. Would there be anything stopping, and I don't know the answer to this, say a French NGO from, winning a grant to resettle people in Poland? I don't see why foreigners in Europe couldn't start doing this in some form of function. Maybe they already are. Maybe there's a law stopping them from it. But something I wonder about, because like you said, Poland doesn't seem to have the same sort of incentives. They have fairly strong border controls, and they don't really seem to be having the same problems as some, or at least in the past, they didn't seem to be having the same problems as some of the other countries in Europe were having, where migrants were all going to very specific places. You land in Italy and you keep heading north until you're in Sweden. Why? I had no idea. I never could answer that. And I assume Sweden has NGOs going, but I don't know what's stopping France from spinning up NGOs and resettling people in Poland. No idea.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't have any insight into that either. Partially because I don't care about what's going on in Europe for the most part. But
no, fair. But it is interesting. One of the reasons that this whole grant freeze executive order that was recently done is so interesting is because a lot of the things that happen that we don't like, that maybe are quasi done by the government, are done through grants like this. So government just puts out a grant, pays an NGO to do something, and the NGO does something that's would otherwise be very unconstitutional for the government to do, or at least questionable, or would make people wonder, like, is this in our best interests? And, this pause to assess where this money is all going is probably very good for us, but a lot of people are screeching, and some people are making things like harder than they need to be. Whoever that was, someone canceled Snap for like a day yesterday after they saw the executive order, and I guess someone had to tell them that, like, no, this isn't canceling Snap just yet. But whether that's malicious compliance or someone just who really needs to click resign in their government email, one of those two.
Right?
I don't know which one it is, but it's still interesting watching this kind of hash out, because I think there's a lot of entities who are probably dependent on grant money to keep doing this kind of thing. And if that money ends up drying up, it might be quite possible that the only I'd say illegal aliens or migrants who end up being left are the ones who have jobs and are paying taxes. Because, if you're dependent on kind of this system of patronage to stay here and the system disappears, maybe they end up self-deporting and this problem ends up being a lot less than we are concerned about.
That's interesting. Does it cut off like grants that are currently being utilized, or is it just kind of a cutoff on new grants of this type being started? Do you know off the top of your head?
To my understanding, well, if you know, you should answer.
Well, I was just looking it up today before we got going that, well, a judge stepped in and blocked it until Monday afternoon. And so there's no freeze on federal spending. And also the Office of Budget, is it Management of Budget or Budget Management, whatever, OMB. Yeah, they also just rescinded the order today. And they just kind of like pulled it back, and it's been very confusing because it's hard. Like there was just so much convolution with it. Like, does this immediately affect is it just all federal's funding? Is it only certain things? What are the demographics of it? I don't know. It seemed like a very hasty decision, which is one of the things I've been chewing on, right? Because part of me, I know that there's a lot of waste in government, and that that review period would probably be beneficial. But then part of me is like, I don't like the executive branch unilaterally deciding Congress can't spend money it's appropriated, even though I know the federal budget is way too much. I'm trying to square these. I'm trying to decide how I really feel about it. It's a tough one. It's a very and it's like, and what does that even mean, right? Like all federal funding, right? Because I mean, what's the U.S. budget, like $2 trillion? It's just a lot of I don't know. It just seems like it's like maybe I like it in the theory of it, but the principle. It doesn't, like the shotgun blast of it leaves way too many collateral damage, where it's like, I don't know, like, do I really want the old people in Cincinnati to all of a sudden get their Meals on Wheels funding cut off? You know what I mean? It's like, like, do I really want that if it means that we find some fat that can be trimmed?
I wonder too. I mean, how many of these people are being sustained by these grants who are maybe just kind of pacified criminal entities right now? And when you pull the money out from them, it's not like they're just going to go, I guess I'm going back to Haiti today. They're going to figure out some other way to survive here in the States. And that maybe that's the first. I was wondering that. I was kind of want to toss that in your guys' way of like, Trump's done a pretty good job so far. This administration hasn't quite stepped in shit yet. There will be a point where we see a really ugly story that has to do with potentially with immigration, but who knows? But when you're moving this quickly, I don't care how much you plan it out and how well you think you understand it, there will be externalities that you can't see coming. And we're going to get something ugly of the first like big step in shit. And maybe that's exactly it. Maybe you freeze all this funding and all of a sudden you activate a lot of otherwise well-behaved immigrants into being less well-behaved.
It's possible, but the funding. Well, okay, so I understand your point. So even if the migrants aren't directly receiving the funding, the entities that are receiving the funding might end up pulling services, and then there might be people who end up doing some criminal things or behaving in ways that would be not conducive to a functioning society. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know how we answer that question, how we think about that as a possibility. Because there's already a lot of negative things that are happening as a function of, I would say, migrants that aren't assimilated or into the culture for the most part. So, when you pull funding for people who haven't found jobs and are not really like contributing or functioning on a regular basis, it might not actually make a difference in terms of like our outcomes and our experiences. Especially if it's like paired at the same time with, let's say half of them leave and half of them become worse. It still might end up being like a net benefit just because like half of them are gone.
I imagine you could spin it pretty easily from the right too. If I was the Republican PR guy, of once they become a little more desperate and start committing crimes, you're not going, it's the fault of us pulling the funding away from them right away and pulling the chair out from them. It's, look at what has happened. Thank goodness this wasn't at this level yet. But now that they see the pressure on them, they're becoming worse and worse. And you're starting to see these horrible, and also probably makes it a little easier to start identifying and deporting people when you're getting a lot more crimes committed. People start stealing stealing to feed themselves.
It's one of those like shake the
now you
tree
commit a
and
crime.
see what comes out on the other end, and that makes sense. And I guess that there is it's when we talk like the federal freeze was just so overwhelming and oversweeping. It's hard to try to like pick apart, you know what I mean? Like what was the goal? What was the intention that was actually trying to, and I understand it's like we're just trying to get a review of where federal dollars are being spent. That's all fine and all. And it just like if you pull funding right for like a NGO that's helping migrants, may or may not assimilate into this country, may or may not do things that we want them as Americans to be doing, but you also cut funding for like after school programs that are helping kids like, go play soccer. And it's just one of those things like when you get that shotgun blast with certain things that I wonder about the collateral damage. And as Americans, are we okay with that collateral damage? If the answer is yes, then so be it. It's not.
Yeah. Think about the future of the United States national soccer team and what you're doing to the talent pool right now.
That's true. I would actually like to see us perform exceptionally well in World Cup when it comes to our, so
worked out pretty good for France.
So, oh my God, don't get me even started.
So just out of curiosity, when you mentioned like kids for soccer, I went to the little Grant thing and I searched soccer just to see what popped up.
Hit
Bro,
me.
none of this has anything to do with soccer. The second one is $3 million for electric buses in downtown Orlando.
Oh, and that's under soccer grants?
Yep. I think one of the stops is by the soccer stadium.
So
And
that's how it popped up.
And that's fair.
Yeah.
And I will say, like, so don't let me come across as I'm here now to sit for big daddy government. I understand that there's massive amounts of waste going on. The only question I have is like, are we should consider collateral damage, and if we're okay with it, then cool, and let's move on.
Okay, they're spending $3 million to build a baseball field, soccer field, football, and lacrosse field in Arizona.
Where?
Jacobs Park. I don't know where that is in Arizona, but $3 million for 4 sports fields seems a little steep. The dog part's getting bigger, and they're getting rid of a parking lot. This sounds steep.
I mean, so like I said, this is just like a perspective. So we're talking about building concessions and bathrooms at our sports facility here where I live, and that like that little thing, you know what I mean? By the time you get water, sewer, get more lights, electric in there, it's going to be like a $700,000 project. I
was about to say, I don't know that $3 million
not
actually.
A ton of, you know what I mean? Like it's not an impressive upgrade that we're doing, but it's gonna,
for a machine with a light bulb that melts fake cheese on top of chips.
Yeah, 700,000 sounds like a lot, man.
It's
like
it's like
a bathroom and a concession stand, and they have to.
It's like, but it's all going to be tied into sewer, blah blah blah.
How far are y'all from maybe this is too detailed, but I remember pricing out just utility extensions in Lago Vista, which is here in Texas, and I'm struggling to see how this gets to 700,000 unless y'all are like, half a mile away or something from like the sewer hookups.
No, the sewer hookup's not half a mile away, but the water and electrical are about that far. That's going to have to be ran up a road that's not maintained very well. You know what I mean? By the time that it's all said and done, it's, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that, we got such a deal for $700,000. You can have not porta potties at our sports facility. But it's just, you know what I mean? It's so the $3 million doesn't make me like cringe, because I mean we're gonna spend $700,000 for a bathroom and concession stand.
I know. I have one short story, and I'll let you go. It's just
go for it.
At my last job, we had to file for a grant, and I was in charge of actually making sure we were like compliant with our grant filing. And it's for something that we are the only people in the world that knew how to do. So we are the only people who knew how to bill for it. We knew what it takes to make one, and we had one made already. We're like, we're going to do the exact same thing over here. This is how many hours it took us last time. We're going to trim X amount of hours from task A, B, C, D. So, our total hours is going to be 27% less. Here's our pricing. And the U.S. government was like, we don't like the format of this grant. This is the format we actually normally use, and it's from a completely different industry. And so we had to reformat the entire grant to meet this random thing from a different industry.
Right.
We had to include hours that nobody was going to work because we didn't need to do it for this project. And it ended up increasing the price by like 70% from our original pitch. And it's like, why are y'all making us do this? Like, we had to go through all this extra work to make the grant more expensive for things that we weren't going to do that they didn't need. And when I think about like a grant for construction, I am instantly very suspicious. It's one thing for someone to construct with their own money or construct with their own budget. It's another when they're applying for grants, because I'm sure the hours they put in to build 4 fields in Arizona, and they mentioned nothing about bathrooms, electricity, water.
Right.
They just said soccer field, lacrosse field, football field, $3 million. It's like $700,000 a field. How much does grass?
That's a good point. I kind of assumed in my head you're talking about concession stands, administrative,
like the whole thing,
stands. Like if it's literally just fields,
I don't know how much it does. It sounds expensive, and I will acknowledge my own bias in this conversation, because I know somebody. So I know a grant writer out of Oklahoma, and she has helped somebody in Oklahoma City do like tremendous things with federal funds. And this guy's a huge pillar of the community. He's done a lot for that city. And so I have a soft spot for it, because I've seen, when applied properly, what good it can actually do. But I know that for every case of the person I'm thinking of, you probably get 10 to 20 that are abusing it. And I acknowledge that. And so I have to be like, let me be transparent about, like, I am personally connected to people that use grants in very positive ways. And you can say that, like, well, thank God that this person got a hold of this grant money and did this, because numerous lives are just all out better because of it. But I acknowledge also that there's probably the ratio of this person and the ones we were talking about with the relocate. You know what I mean? I'm sure the ratio is horrifying if I knew the real amount.
Maybe if we just bring Vivek back into the fold of Doge, and he can we'll keep you and Elon separate. You guys don't have to get along. But if you want a grant, you do have to call Vivek on his personal cell phone and convince him within 5 minutes, or he gets to hang up on you.
Hit him with the elevator pitch, your 30-second, like, why do you need this grant?
This is why this is actually going to be beneficial and not a massive waste of American tax dollars.
Yeah.
I'm going to hit you with one more just because it's funny.
Yeah, hit me with it. Tear me down.
$4.5 million in California to replace the grass on a soccer field with synthetic turf to decrease water usage. $4.5 million.
Seems, I don't know what the price of turf is. Seems a little high. But you know what I mean? If you could stop an entire neighborhood of,
I have seen numbers. I don't know them off the top of my head, but I have seen numbers on artificial turf before, and it is not a cheap endeavor. It is very expensive. There's a reason we only, in our little podunk redneck town in the middle of nowhere, we played on a lot of brown grass football fields where there was no life in it because they couldn't afford to water it. And then every once in a while, we'd go south about 2 hours and hit the oil fields. Oh, and all those roughneck kids, you're like, you guys have heated water in your showers? Like, that was enough to blow our mind, let alone that we're going to play on turf this week.
Ooh, so this is some quick math. High-end turf is anywhere from $6 to $12 a square foot. And with that comes a premium install price of anywhere from $15 to $20 a square foot. So on the highest end, you're looking at about $36 a square foot. And that's not counting in like the basic preparation, any sort of like filling materials, the drainage considerations. That's just like $36 a square foot to get you some turf, some really good turf.
Oh, well, hey, in this case, that actually makes the budget make sense. So a soccer field average is 81,000 square feet. So just putting the $36 per square foot, that actually gets you right to $3 million. So,
oh, well, and you know what I mean? Maybe this is one of those things that if it happens, everyone would look and say, like, great, good use of, you know what I mean? Good use of grant money. Because also, like, if California, like, they have a water problem, if you haven't heard. Those hydrants are running out of water. So, maybe you don't want to be spending water spending money watering soccer fields. so nice neighborhoods connected to P. Diddy don't burn down.
Right. Hey, I want to say, government, great job on that $3 million soccer field with the artificial turf. It looks awesome. Have you guys thought about the poop on the streets from all the homeless people by chance?
We have not. Next question.
Wait, now I'm curious. If I were to search for poop in this grant thing,
Oh,
I
mean, is that going to just like bring in like waste room? You know what I mean? Like municipal grants for waste removal, solid waste, water, all that good stuff.
The first one has to do with animals. It's kind of long. I'm not sure if I want to read the whole thing. The word piglet stands out.
Oh.
The second one is about this disease that's affecting bats. It's called white nose syndrome, and it is actually kind of a big deal. Apparently,
Heard about that.
Yeah. Okay, and that's it. There's only 2 of them. Okay.
Oh,
I thought there'd be more poop grants than that. So you hear this, Logan? There are 0 grants for poop on the street in San Francisco. They don't care about it at all.
But you can get, you know what I mean? God knows how much. And so point well made, right? For every one of these grants that you say like, oh, well, I'm glad that they got funding. They did a good thing with it. There are people that are abusing the system, taking full advantage of it, of this regulatory or like lack thereof bureaucracy that's just run amok, that's just been handing out grants willy-nilly for a long time. I'm not here to argue against that. So I don't know the answer. And so it makes you wonder. I'm really curious about Monday when this ends up in another court, because the temporary pause on it was for Monday at 5 p.m., but there's another jurisdiction that's having a hearing on it that's seeking to permanently block the federal spending freeze on Monday. I think that's like Monday morning. I can't remember. I think it's in D.C., which makes a lot of sense.
When you say spending freeze, do you mean the freeze on spending new money or on the grant spending?
Or just like anything that was wrapped up in Trump's executive order and that memo from the OMB. It's specifically dealing to that. And I'm in this like weird place because part of me like it's like cool like gut the system, like stop wasting my tax dollars. And the other part's like I don't really like, you know what I mean, is like there is a separation of powers and like the purse falls under Congress and like the president unilaterally just deciding what's already been appropriated. I don't love it. And this is the tight line that we should walk. Is just because it gets you what you want today, are you okay with the methods of how it's applied, right? Because we've been screeching into the microphone about liberals all this time, like executive orders, you know, it's like, we've been saying, it's like, they are expanding the power of the government. They're like, well, that's okay because we like what's going on. And all of a sudden Trump gets in with all of this, you know, momentum and precedence behind him for the executive branch to do what it wants. And now all of a sudden everyone's like, my constitution, you know. And
executive order, if your hair is not a natural color, you're a terrorist.
Oh, there's a lot of Karens going down.
I personally have no idea if this is or isn't constitutional. Because from my understanding, it was like a temporary freeze for them to assess and see what makes sense and what is in line and what isn't in line. And, you know, Congress can authorize spending, but they don't have to say like you have to spend it now. They say you just have to spend it within these fiscal years. And, you know, a temporary freeze, I don't think steps over the line in terms of constitutionality.
Sure.
And if it was just some sort of like permanent halts on all spending, yeah, I think obviously there's a question because as everybody knows, Congress and Senate are in charge of the purse strings, not the president. But there is some ability, especially for
every American's fully aware of that.
Right. As soon as I said that in my head, I'm like rolling my eyes.
It's like, actually, no, we don't know that. Sir, my IQ's 95 and I went to public school. Okay. I don't know that. That's fair. And I think that it does get, and I will try to follow that as much as I can. I don't know if that's going to be in a courtroom that allows cameras that, you know, that you can actually going to be able to sit in and watch the arguments. Not that I'm a constitutional scholar and we'll be able to understand half of what they say anyways, but there is, you know, I mean, there is some discretionary ability for the president with some funds, but for the most part, right? Congress, the president proposes a budget, Congress approves it, or Congress says, "Screw you, Mr. President. Here's the budget we will pass. Either sign it or the government shuts down." Right? I think that's really what it's descended into. Ideally, it would be president proposes a budget, Congress approves it with some give and take. But now it's just like, well, sign it or we'll shut everything down, and it's your fault, Mr. President, that old people don't get their checks anymore. I am really curious, though, to see what the arguments will be on the actual merits of why this is in the president's purview. And I don't know how much you guys followed the arguments in the Supreme Court for immunity when that whole thing was going on. But some of those were fascinating to actually hear the argument that Trump's attorneys were going in front of the Supreme Court and arguing like, well, this is what we interpret this particular part of this one area and in this weird corner that almost nobody has heard of unless you're like a Supreme Court justice or a top tier constitutional law scholar. This is how we interpret this thing to mean. And because of that, these are the consequences. I don't know how much but I found that utterly fascinating. And then to hear the justices be like, oh, okay, well but then what do you think about this? And then, I don't know, I find that stuff so fascinating.
Yeah, it's interesting to an extent, I think, as well. And I'd be curious to see how the justices rule about this sort of thing. And I understand that certain things like the whole condoms for Gaza thing, I think that's one thing that does fall under the purview of like the executive branch because it's foreign aid and most foreign diplomacy is almost exclusively the executive branch. Mm-hmm. But I almost feel like we don't have enough time to ever like look into any one thing because obviously we're those kind of like internet retards who like, oh, I'm hearing about this for the first time. Let me be autistic and dive into a rabbit hole and see what comes out, which is how we come to conclude most of these things. But ultimately, I find that like time is moving so fast in terms of what happens every day that you only really get enough time to like look at one or two things and everything else just kind of whizzes by you. And maybe that's part of the strategy of this administration as a whole is just like getting a person for this, a person for that, and everyone's an expert in their own little thing. And then having them just go on like a little blitzkrieg offensive and run right past the Maginot Line that would normally be the media slow rolling everything. And that's one thing that's been interesting too in terms of the firings. Basically, everyone who works in an executive level department has been removed or has been fired. And everyone who doesn't serve at like the will of the president has gotten like the little letter that says like you can resign and you get all of your pay until the end of the fiscal year, which is like a really interesting move. And a lot of people have been going on about how these firings have been unconstitutional, but he fired everyone he could, and then everyone else he couldn't fire, he gave the like 9 months of pay, which is interesting to watch because I think it's tough for us to really like conceptualize of just how actually like by the books that sort of move is. And it makes me wonder, because that's the one move that I've understood, at least in terms of like book wise, like are all the rest of these moves as by the book as this? I don't know. I have no idea.
Are you talking about like the firing of the inspectors general?
Yep.
And that's one of those things too, where
there are also 3 more firings today at the USDA that I saw. There might be
okay,
more.
Gotcha. And the inspectors general is one of those things where it's like, technically, I bet you know what I mean. As I understand it, like as an autist on the outside, Congress passed a law that you have to give a 30-day notice to remove the inspectors general. And so really, it's like, do we care about 30 days at the end of the day? Right? It's like he can still fire them at the end of the 30 days after he gives Congress notification. It's like, how much do we really care about the notification? Because it only delays the legal inevitable, as far as I understand it, for a month. And so it's like, is that something that is that a hill worth dying on or not? And I mean, and really it's like, what I'm surprised is like why there's not more outrage from Congress, really, because like the inspectors general work in government to then report back to, ideally they're supposed to be like the internal watchdogs to make sure the government's not running amok. You know what I mean? And so you would think that instead of like all these people screaming "free," you would have Congress being like, "But my reports," you know what I mean? It's like, but I need to know how the Department of Interior is handling these shootings in national parks. Like, without this, how am I supposed to inform my constituency about the things that really matter to them? And I've seen a lot more outrage from the public instead of Congress when like most people don't even know that this position exists, and like they don't, you know what I mean, like they don't report to the public, they report back to Congress about what their department is doing and try to be like the internal watchdog. And so I'm just surprised that there's not more like pushback in Congress, because if you think the Trump administration is, you know, Hitler 2.0 and he is an autocrat, well, and it's like, why not more concerned about the office that's supposed to try to report back to you about the actions in the government? It's odd.
It might be a little bit of telling on themselves, to be honest. I mean, to your point, it's like that's not where they're getting their information and marching orders from anyway. It's coming a lot more from these lobbyist groups, and it really doesn't affect what they do all that much to know what's going on the ground, because they already know what's going to be. But that what's in that bill has nothing to do with that Inspector General.
It's a good point. Yeah, maybe it is them telling on themselves that, you know, because I mean, there was a strongly worded letter from 2 senators. It's just like, you owe us by law to tell us why you're firing these people, and in 30 days you can fire them anyways, but you can't fire them today. And that was kind of the vibe that I've gotten from it.
And I don't know if this is true, but I had heard that like he actually didn't need to do the 30-day period because it was the acting AG that did the firing. And if Trump's AG had been appointed, then it would have to be 30 days. But since it's from the old admin, I have no idea if that's true or not.
That's
just something I stumbled on. And I, just like everything else, did not have enough time to actually like look and confirm, because it's like
really
some obscure section of law that like once you start looking for it, like 5 minutes in, you're like, what am I even doing? What does this have to do with me? So I have no idea. But yeah, no, it is a good point, because ultimately, I think, does the 30 days matter? Probably not to most people, but I think the 30 days matters a lot to us. Since, you know, realistically, as the president, he's only got 4 years, and that 4 years isn't really 4 years. His first fiscal year doesn't start till October of this year. So, you know, almost a year since the election. You know, his first tax year doesn't start for another fiscal year after that, unless they really ram through some new tax legislation. So, you know, he's really only got like a year and a half of like fully having his own stuff in place. And so, you know, a delay of 30 days for firing OIGs, getting your own people in that position, it might actually be more significant than we think. But I don't know. I guess it's a question of like how much time is enough.
I mean, there's also, as a general practice in a lot of places I've worked, when you are planning on firing somebody or letting them go at the end, or even when they put their 2 weeks notice in and they're not somebody you particularly have a lot of trust or a great relationship with, we found it prudent a lot of times to just go, hey, we really appreciate your 2 weeks notice. We're going to go ahead and accept your resignation now, because I don't want you here doing God knows what over the next 2 weeks, because you've already secured another job. You don't need my reference anymore. You don't give a shit about this job. And maybe you're angry about some things that happened here, or a little resentful towards the corporate team. And this is a position, I don't know exactly what an inspector general could get done in that amount of time, or change in that amount of time, but you know, if you have a lot of people who are ideologically completely opposed to your presidency and completely opposed to everything you're trying to do with this efficiency breakdown of government, you know, how long is it before you find somebody that within 30 days can really find a couple wrenches to stick in the gears?
Absolutely. And honestly, just from what I know about the OIG, I think the only thing that could really interrupt would be the actions of Doge. Because, you know, they could make like a counter report countering Doge and being like, actually, no, that money was well spent. It didn't actually get dumped into the ocean like they said, you know, something along those lines. But that is
completely reasonable that hammer costs $10,000.
Yeah, it needs to be able to survive on Mars. This one specifically, we're sending it up in 5 years and we can't build any more, blah, blah, blah. But it is an interesting point, though, about like, you know, firing people as soon as they give you a 2 weeks. Because you are kind of right. Other than having like an extra body in the restaurant or extra body doing whatever, there isn't really like a need for that person there, especially if you know that you can cover in for their duties in the meantime between hiring. And that's definitely something that's certainly interesting in this aspect, especially if we can consider like the end of Joe Biden's presidency is almost like an official 2 weeks notice for every single bureaucrat within the executive department. From that perspective, it's like, why not fire them now? How many allies can you really find in there, especially if you want to make this level of radical change? And personally, I don't know if y'all have done this yet, but y'all should get on Reddit and just search for like job, anything along those lines, and you'll find thousands upon thousands of administrators, bureaucrats, NGOs, people who have had weird contracts complaining. I read one earlier today. Their entire thing was about procuring mosquito nets for like the Congo. And they were like, I don't know, this experience doesn't translate to anything else. How else am I going to find another job?
Hold up. Let me defend their work, all right? Because if there's no mosquito nets in Congo, think of how many mosquitoes are going to die from AIDS, all right? Let me defend their work, okay?
Think of the poor mosquitoes. Oh my God. I'm going to get canceled for this.
All right, those people were doing invaluable work.
But beyond the laughter, though, if we actually think about like the knock-on effects, what do property values in Washington D.C. look like after this? What does an investment in an apartment complex look like? What does a retirement fund look like if it's heavy into REITs, which is a real estate investment trust? They just buy properties in certain areas. What do many parts of the world look like where they've been kind of terraformed by this false industry of some form? We talked about the restaurant thing. There's certainly a chance that, I don't know, 25% of restaurants could go under if we lose 25% of work staff in that area. Does this look like entire cities just not having a restaurant industry, or does this look like every city just, having less restaurants? It's easy for us to laugh. And
one benefit of that is, I believe probably the greatest abusers of that are your gigantic, grotesque corporate entities. So you're looking at your McDonald's, your fast food, your all these different. So I don't know. Some of those die out. I don't know if it's the end of the world for us to have a revamping of small mom and pop type restaurants that might actually pay a decent wage to somebody.
Yeah. And who knows? Maybe I got to start thinking about all the Johns out there who are going to be wondering where all the hookers went, the hand job places that will be closing down. I mean, there are a lot of industries that kind of get nuked overnight if they don't have just like a steady inflow of new faces. And it's interesting to think about because some of these might be things that we enjoy or use on a regular basis,
Or think about the boon of money to be in the hands of American whores, finally. All these immigrant whores taking money out of our good sluts' hands when they could be the meager millions they're making on OnlyFans right now. Just imagine.
MAGA, baby. Dude, we're going to make America great again. Getting a good old American blowjob, all right? No more of these teeth-grinding immigrant.
We get you some a good American for-profit blowjob industry going, and maybe we see a little bit of less children going missing that are for the purpose of low-end permanent employee status.
That's
one day you heard "No mames, senor" for the last time, and you just didn't know.
And you just didn't know it, man. It's heavy, dude. It's heavy. I wonder, and this is I don't know because I haven't looked that much into it. Do you guys know how much this, all of like the border and immigration policy affects like J1 work visas and stuff? Because I was just thinking about like the ski industry in particular. Like without J1s, like all of a sudden there's going to be a lot of ski resorts that aren't spinning lifts next winter if that work program's not in full force. I don't know.
I haven't seen anything yet that's going after like visa applications,
Gotcha.
visa application numbers. It's possible something like that might come later down the line. From comments we've heard, it doesn't sound like Trump is very keen on going after visas just yet. I mean, he hasn't really said anything negative about H-1Bs or anything along those lines. And like as far as visas go, J-1 is like the most benign because it's like a temporary one where they are leaving at a certain period. Um, but then again, I've heard some people complaining about them, and I actually don't know the full workings of them. So, maybe it's possible there is some way to abuse them or exploit them. But I don't know. You are definitely right about the ski industry, though. Having them come up during their summer definitely helps actually like make sure there's enough employees at all of our lift lines, because there's definitely some of the lesser known resorts struggle. One of my old projects used to be near a ski resort in Maryland, Western Maryland, just kind of way out
what
there.
elevation? 150? Like
it was really low, dude. I wish I could look it up. It's called the Wisp Resort. So I would stay there because it was very close to our project, and I was like, oh, I get to stay at a ski resort during the summertime.
Do you mean the hill in my backyard? Like, anyways.
But I definitely talked to a bunch of the employees like while I was there. And there was one time I was actually there during the season, but I couldn't go snowboarding because I couldn't stay for the weekend. I had to work the whole week. But apparently almost all of their staff, except for the people at the bar, were J1s. They didn't have anyone who was able to like man the lifts and who lived out there. And it's kind of in like the ass end of nowhere. Like it's at that little corner of like Maryland and West Virginia. And yeah, Maryland.
You're talking about that weird little like sliver that has a little thing hanging down, and it makes you wonder why like Virginia or Pennsylvania weren't man enough to just take it from them.
Oh yeah, I actually know why. Pennsylvania and Maryland did get in like this whole spat back in like the 1700s, and they had Mason Dixon, the famous surveyors, go out,
yes,
and they're like, okay, we're going to start here, which is where we agree the northern and southern border is, and we're going to pay you guys to just walk west and just keep dropping these stones, and this is going to be the border between Pennsylvania and Maryland. And they didn't know how thin it was going to get once they got all the way west out there, but they had already agreed by contract that it was going to be whatever they actually ended up
whatever
surveying.
Parallel they agreed on. Yep. And it's like, go west, young man.
So they had that tiny little sliver just forever.
Oh, that's interesting.
It's one of the oldest straight lines that was surveyed in the U.S. And those like Mason-Dixon lines are still out there, like the stones. They put them every couple miles, and you can still find them. They're just kind of sitting around. Some of them are covered in like little iron cages to stop people from taking them, but some of them are just out in the open.
I was just about to say, it's weird to me people had stolen them all. I feel like with it's just knowing how people are. No, they have. We put cages around them.
Oh,
this is mine.
The sniper that watches the rock line.
Oh man. Well, let me see if I can even find that resort. Where was it? Oh, it was in McHenry, Maryland. So yeah, kind of out there in that corner on a lake. And I'm sure the elevation is tiny, but it was all J1s. There wasn't a single American staff member there except for the bar. And I imagine for a lot of ski resorts that are just kind of not tier one in terms of like visibility, that this is kind of how they staff. I think it's the only way.
Like the mountain that I live at, there's a huge population of workers there, J1s. Every winter, they come in, and that's and it's not to say that you probably couldn't have operations without them, but it makes staffing a lot easier if you know what I mean. If you can put people in hotels, if you can put some lifties, it's not the non-essential roles, right? But it is the less trained roles. Things you know.
Think there would be some kind of push to like reappropriate that program for America, areas in America where there's no jobs. Like, why not go to the boonies where there's, or inner cities, and like I almost joked they didn't go to Baltimore to find their lift operators.
Well, to be fair,
legitimately, how many kids don't have?
How many
money? And
I know there's like some racism in here, but it's like, how many kids from Baltimore really want to come freeze their? You know what I mean? Like,
those kids want to have their only financial feasibly conceivable winter.
That's a good
of
point.
skiing.
Like I don't know
When
how
else is that kid ever going to touch a pair of skis?
You never know.
Good
And
point.
it's
Actually,
actually
really
is a
good
good
point.
question because we do spend a lot of money bringing immigrants in and putting them in random job programs. And I do wonder what the efficacy would be if we were to direct, let's say 20% of this grant money towards like inner city kids. It's like, hey, look, we can fly you somewhere out middle of nowhere. We'll get you a hotel room, a job, and training course. It's something that you can do if you wanted to just get out of where you are right now. What would be the conversion rate? Like, how successful would they be about creating people with legitimate employments and like long-term life skills? You know,
And in
because
an
like
industry that's struggling
What
desperately
makes you wonder?
with like appealing to younger audiences and getting more skiers and snowboarders into it as that dies off. What has been a better track record in America of injecting coolness into something than getting the black guys involved?
All right,
Get
so
a
let
couple
me
brothers out there on the slopes.
let me
Let's make
put
it
on
popular
my
for the
old
kids
man
again.
hat. If I see one more goddamn jersey on my mountain,
maybe you got to stop riding during the Super Bowl, man.
if I see one more jersey, I'm gonna lose it. No, that's actually a really good point. I mean, I know this is kind of a niche area, but it serves as a microcosm that extrapolates to a lot of other niche industries that I don't know about that exist that have these unique problems. But yeah, if you could all of a sudden, instead of bringing in J1s, but you could relocate Americans, is that enough to turn the tide of a dying industry? Is that enough to interject enough youth, enough new
And,
blood
not to say that it
into
makes
it?
it financially viable for some of those industry or some of those communities that are lower socioeconomic income, but you get to introduce your industry to a demographic that has had zero to do with the industry either. So it's a new potential demographic that you could get into the sport.
A huge tapping. And I will say that as expensive as the ski industry is, I understand that they do a really good job if you're an insider making it accessible to you. So like when I was on Ski Patrol, we ended up getting like through the National Ski Patrol, we got these pro deals. And so you got like 60% off skis, 50% off bindings, 50% off boots. You know what I mean? Like all of a sudden when I started, I was making $13 an hour and I could afford to buy some really nice gear because it was half off. And so it's like once you're in it, it actually, there's a lot of incentives that makes it more affordable, right? Because nobody's making big money in the ski industry. Like, no, you know what I mean? Unless you're like a big wig in a C-level position, like nobody, you know what I mean? Like the ski patrol director here, nobody makes, and it's a good job, but you know what I mean? You're not going to get rich being a ski patrol director at any mountain. And yeah, it does make you wonder if you could incentivize people that you're not going to capture in any other way, right? I don't know. Maybe a jobs program to Baltimore is one of the best things the ski industry could do. I don't know. Might make sense.
You're not going to get a lot of annual skiers from, no matter how much you introduce them to the industry, is South Americans. It's a long fucking way to go, and you're passing some other mountains on the way.
Yeah, absolutely. They just ski at home during their own winter, and then they come here for work.
Right.
But it is also interesting too, because I think we don't really conceive of just how many industries are totally different on their face. So I went to Alaska last year. I don't. Might not have been last year.
It was last year.
Okay, it was last year. So the very first night we were there, we stayed in one of these towns that's like Instagram famous because it has like the longest tunnel between like the one side of the other. You have to go through a tunnel under the glacier.
I didn't even know they had Jewish towns in Alaska.
There's a railroad track in the entire tunnel as well. You're literally driving on the railroad track. The town's called Whittier, and it's kind of famous because everybody lives in one building in the town. It's like at the top of the town. It's like up a hill. It's this gigantic, like sherbet colored building, and literally everything is in there. All the jobs are in there as well. Post office. There's the people who stamp documents, courthouse, police, fire, blah, 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 blah. But we just happened to be there on the last day of the fishing season. because it was the end of summer. It was like August. And there's only one bar in the town, and the bar was on top of the hotel we stayed in, which is the
Let's
only
go.
other place you can stay in that's not that one building. And so we're like, oh, let's go up to the top of the bar. Let's see what's going on. We walk in, and it's nothing but Mexicans. And I was just like a little confused because I'm like, I'm in like asshole nowhere, Alaska. We drove through this fucking tunnel. I've seen nothing but white people and like Inuits or whatever the natives were calling themselves up in Alaska. I'd seen nobody else. And the entire time, even in the town, it's all like white people. And I go up the stairs to the bar, and it's nothing but Mexicans. And apparently, the fish processing plant was on its last day, and so they were all celebrating in the bar. And these people, all these Mexicans, were about to get shipped back to Mexico at the end of the fishing season. I assume they were also on J-1 visas as well. And again, it just begs the question: like, if we're spending all this money on grants to bring people across the border, why can't we spend money as a grant for like, hey, just go work in the fishing industry and go learn how to work at a fish processing plant? It's 3 months in the summer in Alaska. You might enjoy yourself.
Imagine the crossover benefit of like taking somebody who lives in an area where they cannot find a job and sending them somewhere to learn a valuable skill in an industry they never thought of. And how many of them decide that's the industry they want to work in the rest of their life, or find some other way of living? Maybe they just get introduced to somebody while they're in Alaska and they're like, man, it's not that bad up here. I could probably figure out how to deal with the cold. I live in Baltimore. It sucks ass there and it's cold also. So why not, go start a new life and a new, and then you're also, I mean, the vicious cycle of being caught in one of those neighborhoods and kind of what you referred to earlier of the culture of the neighborhood ends up changing your own moral structure because you have to live within this new set of rules that have been set upon you by the community. And how many of those, that's the argument of like, well, how many of these kids even had a chance? They were criminals by the time they were 14 because everybody around them forced them into this life. Everybody they have to look up to is in this life. What's the benefit of taking that kid, sending them to Alaska for a summer, getting some hard work in and seeing some role models who aren't criminals,
Yeah, for real. I mean, when we talk about jobs programs for Americans, especially for the youth, there's worse ways to spend money. And I understand this obviously helps enrich like an industry. I'm sure the fish processing plant would love to have subsidized labor.
Of course.
If we've got all these places where we just have to subsidize labor through like some form of migrant or whatnot, it seems
you're already spending the money, but you're letting it leave the country.
Exactly. And like, how are we going to populate Greenland once we actually do buy it, man?
It's actually a good point. We got to start getting people acclimated to the harsh winter environment right now.
Yeah. Imagine if we had a government program to populate the state that we've just bought. And it's like, hey, look, we're paying you to go over there. Here are the industries you can work in. You work and keep your job. We've got a bonus for you every 3 months you stay employed. Fantastic. I'd love to see some Zoomers go up there. Not that I want like Zoomers to go away, but it's just, opportunity to do something. I mean, that's kind of what the military is all about too.
Right. So since on this, in the same vein of this conversation, how do you guys feel about like mandatory service when they should, right? So like certain countries have like, you know what I mean? Like you have to so Switzerland, right? You got to join the military. Doesn't matter, man, woman, 18 to 20, you're in the military after you're done 20.
Yeah,
and so I'm not saying like,
I'm not saying stay there until you know what every tool in that little knife does.
Which, you know what I mean? Some of those are
and what about
complex.
This one, yeah?
Some of those, you might need a year to actually figure out because they can get pretty big.
Complicated.
Have you ever been on the website?
Some
of those are just like this. They're
what
massive. Like, what do you even do with that? Like, you can't fit that in a pocket. You can't just carry that around. It's a very specialized tool. But on the same vein, right? Like a national, like some sort of like national service program, national work program, that it's not that like you have to join the military because I don't want to just sign up American kids to go die in foreign wars we don't care about. But if you have the opportunity to go to Alaska for the summer, to go to Maryland for the summer, go crabbing, move up to where I live and work in a ski resort. I don't know. It doesn't seem like the worst use of our dollars and our national attention and energy. Now, I understand the arguments, like, do you want to compulsory service, all that stuff? I understand it. But I just wonder about like the net benefits, the net negatives. Like, what do you guys think about that?
I'll let you go first, Logan. I've been talking unless you want me to go.
Wow, that's terrible because I was spending that time not listening to Matt and looking up what the largest Swiss Army knife
That's
was.
fair. Logan's actually really good at ignoring me, and I don't take it. I don't take it personally at this point.
I was
Logan's
going down a rabbit hole.
dude. Logan's been ignoring me since I was 14 years old. So
honestly, I don't blame him.
That's fair. I have no rebuttal.
Well, I can go then, Logan.
I'm
unless
kind of
you
annoying.
wanna hop
That's
in
fair.
anyways.
I would encourage you to go first, but real quickly, would y'all want to take a guess on how many functions the largest Swiss Army knife has?
39.
The largest. I'm going to go more conservative. I'm saying 26.
You're incorrect. It was 73 functions.
The fuck?
Bro.
The Swiss Champ XXL.
Share with the class real fast. Share your screen. I want to see it.
Yeah, I want to see it,
it up real quick. I mean, it's hardly a knife anymore.
That's what I'm saying.
As much
it's
as
a
like
brick
a car
of like
battery you have to carry around.
It's like a Batman utility tool at that
Let's
point.
see. Share screen. Swiss Army knife. There we go. That's the monstrosity you're looking at. I mean, it is literally a brick.
Fuck, dude.
Like you no longer even hold that vertically. You have to hold it horizontally. That's the thinner angle to hold it at is the length of the knife, not the width
That's
of the
ridiculous.
It looks like a dangerous sea creature that you're told not to step on.
knife. Oh, there
Or
it is,
you
all
can-
compacted and
or you
closed
can
up. See,
eat.
look how manageable that is. It's barely larger than twice the width of that man's hand.
Yeah, it's a cell phone. It's a cell phone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It definitely looks like a sea creature that you can only eat when prepared by a certain chef. Otherwise, it will kill you.
Yeah, good God, they do not look like pocket tools at all. Well, if we're going to talk about the concept of service, I don't like the idea of compulsory service for the military just because it weakens the military in like a lot of different ways. And I'm not really sure if I like the idea of like a national service either, but I like the idea of one that's like voluntary, where it's like, hey, look, if you don't know what you want to do, you can do a year of service in any one of these number of things. We pay for your travel, your room, your board. So you have no cost whatsoever. You get paid a stipend as well. And you get to come out to do something in XYZ place. And we have a number of different openings. They all pay a different amount based on like how desirable they are. That way, the undesirable stuff still gets filled. It's just like an opportunity for kids. Because like, you know, you might apply for a job and you can't get a job. Or you might be stuck in a small town and you can't pay rent anywhere interesting. So you're stuck with whatever jobs are in your area. It's just a way to allow people to have a bunch of opportunities they otherwise wouldn't have. Because there's a lot of places, like even like at our research facilities in Antarctica, they just need a janitor. They're paying like $80,000 for janitors to show up. And like obviously you're living in Antarctica, it's kind of awful. But at the same time, it's kind of exciting and interesting if you're into that kind of thing. And I think these are the kind of opportunities that like need to be available for children. And when I say children, I mean like teenagers, sorry. But just in case.
I mean,
you know,
those
there's nothing else
85,000
for
they found in shipping containers. So what are we going to do with all those kids? We can't utilize their marketable skill of sex slavery because of,
Welcome to the farm.
age of consent.
All I know how to do is sew mosquito nets. What do I do now?
You saved the mosquitoes, damn it. No, that's I agree with that. Not so much like the compulsory part, because compulsory anything not down with, but if there was a national jobs program, I would not be upset about that, because I think that at the end of like whatever you ended up spending up front with the money for said program, society would be a net positive for society. And so I think that's like a good, you know what I mean? I think it's a good use of a national resource,
because giving people skills and opportunities for one, but also just like, what do you would just naturally start whittling away at your lowest socioeconomic status people on some level. I mean, I guess maybe not the lowest, because you're going to hit a level of competency maybe that you're not interested in giving jobs to, or capable of giving jobs to, that they can actually fulfill the needs of. I think it'd be great to start with kids for one, because you're setting up the next generation, but you're also just more malleable. I think you can probably take any 13-year-old and teach them how to do something. 16-year-old maybe is a little more appropriate for work program. But kids are sponges. You get set in your own ways at some point and damage your body and brain with enough drugs and alcohol that you're not able to learn new things anymore. But yeah, that when you think about the lowest socioeconomic status individuals in our society and what that entails as far as drug abuse and criminal records and what people end up getting into when they're out of options or undereducated or whatever the case is, the cacophony of circumstances that causes people to become those type of people. And how many people do you remove from that? And how many people are the next generation when you have a generation of people from that neighborhood who now have a little bit of money to invest and to send their kids off to a better situation? And it seems like a win-win rather than shipping people in from Brazil to do it.
Absolutely. There's a really interesting stat, and it talks about the greatest way to get poor kids not to be poor when they're adults and kind of change the stars. So just, you know what I mean? Like if you want to start to have generational impacts, it's have poor kids grow up next to rich kids. And these cross socioeconomic
you just knock up one of those chicks. Now their parents are going to take care of the kid.
And they say, you will get a job in the family company and you will make something of yourself because my daughter cannot have anything less. But it's a real thing. Like if you don't have those outside influences to show that, this is actually obtainable, right? And I mean, I think of myself in that way, right? And it's like, you've seen the house I grew, you know what I mean? Like you guys have been to the house I live in. I grew, by no means rich, but I had rich friends. Like we know the rich friends I'm talking about. And like growing up, it shows it's like, oh, wait a minute. Like you might actually be able to do more than live in the 1,200 square foot house you live in now.
Mm-hmm.
You might actually, like if you like, whether this is true or not in the overarching scheme of things, but it's like, like if I go to college and try, it's like whatever story you want to tell yourself. It's like, I guess the story, it's like you can have a better life. And
it's hard to take a path to success that you have no idea exists.
Exactly. And I think that would be a huge benefit of introducing kids to a world that you're not going to understand, right? Because I know a lot of people that join the military, not because they wanted to join the military, because like my business partner, he joined the military because it was the only way out of Brooklyn. Like if it's like if I didn't join the Army Rangers, I was never getting out of my little neighborhood. I know people from West Virginia. It's like I joined the Navy. Why? Because it was the only way out of my small little town in West Virginia. And if you open that up in a way, that started to fill these jobs that will need filling because we're deporting all of these people. I don't know. I think it's a win-win-win across the board.
Sounds like we need to talk to Trump. Who's got his number? Just fix some shit.
No, we're just going to tweet it out. I think we get enough retweets on it. It'll end up as an executive order within 7 days.
Man, do you imagine? Yeah, there you go. Do you imagine the boon of success that could potentially be for the Republican Party too, if they took a large amount of Democratic voter base and gave them a future? Like, man, you could cripple the Democratic Party for a long time.
The next 40 years.
Some people might argue that the kids have already shifted that way. I mean, we had the 29.
I thought you were going to say you could argue that the Democrats have already done that to themselves.
Yeah. I mean, they're kind of screwed even for kids who are like 9, 10 years old right now. I think they've kind of like lost that demographic, and they're just going to have a wave of people turning 18, voting Republican, and probably not even thinking about it for 10 years and just doing it just because it's the only thing that's not gay. And I think that's going to be really tough for them to overcome. However they do it, I don't know. But if we cement it with a jobs program, game over, baby.
God. I wanted to ask this. How do y'all see? I mean, obviously Trump, like I said, is a big PR guy. He wants to make sure that this is a resounding success to the start of the presidency. He got to hit the ground running and is at an incredible pace right now that's hard to keep up with. But how long can he keep this pace? Like at some point, we're already seeing challenges in the courts. Like that's going to obviously come along. But How many of these executive orders do you think he's got in the pipeline that he's still rolling out? It doesn't seem like we've really slowed a whole lot just yet.
My guess is we're going to see probably about another 3 to 4 months of this. And through that time period, you're going to, it's like things will slow down. Something that I think is very unique that I don't know if enough people appreciate is the way that Trump's second term has come about, right? Like Trump is the second president in American history to have non-consecutive, second term. Like Grover Cleveland was the last one. He was like in the late 1800s, I want to say. Like this has not happened it's only the second time it's always happened. And when some of the political insiders I listen to talk about how a lot of presidents enter their second term, they're tired, they're worn out, they're beat from their campaign, also while trying to like couple that with governing and all of this, batting down scandals and opposition, yada, yada. But Donald Trump's had like 4 years to think, to plot, to scheme, and he's coming in with a fresh
become
team.
Resentful after everything
Absolutely.
we got.
And I think that we are underestimating just how much energy he is coming into this. And what makes it super interesting is that he is not burdened by first term syndrome for any president, right? Like if you're elected to the presidency for the first time, you are trusting a lot of insiders. You have your core circle, but outside of that, you really start to lean on, oh, well, I hear that this person is good in this area. I hear that this person is an expert here. Donald Trump's had, 4 years of presidency to fuck up. He's had 4 years to understand like who his supporters are, who his loyalists are, who he doesn't want to populate cabinet positions, important government roles, and also like 4 years of just like, I hate the deep state because they're trying to bury me in lawfare. Whether that's true or not, don't know. But the perception and that motivation that gives him is very real. It's like Dan Carlin, like, if like a society believes in magic, what are the unquantifiable returns that puts? Like if you believe that the oracle in Sparta, says that this and it matters, well, what real effects does that have on your society and the decisions you make? So I think that we underestimate just how unique of a position that he's in, and it doesn't stop anytime soon. He's got the energy, he's got the motivation, he's got a very unique position that honestly only one other president's ever been in.
I would say also, the second time you do anything, you kind of have this mindset of like, oh, now that I know what's going to happen, I'm really going to get this thing started off right. And in terms of government and how slow everything moves and how much things can't be undone once they're done, kind of like what you said, if you're coming into your second term, there's not a lot you can change that's already been done. You're piloting a gigantic boat per se.
Right.
It's not very nimble. You can't turn on a dime. So even if you have experience, you can't really actually utilize that experience in any way, unless like Trump, you don't get awarded your second term, and then you get to start your second term completely afresh. He's probably one of the only presidents in 100+ years, or whatever, what's his face, Grover Cleveland was president, that's actually gotten to utilize his experience as president in a brand new administration. And that's something that really can't be underestimated, or it can't be overestimated. Sorry.
It's why, and I know I've brought this trope, it's becoming a trope on this show at this point, but the amount of power and responsibility that the Democratic establishment system has had in making Donald Trump what he is. Like, I fully believe that the actions of the DNC are the only reason Trump ever became president.
Yep.
And then to have, whether you believe it was a stolen election or not, to have a lot of fishy stuff happen in an election and to embolden him in thinking that you stole it. And then to spend 4 years running amok and just absolutely giving every power to go after domestic terrorism that you could to the the executive branch, only to hand it back to Donald Trump. The Donald Trump phenomenon has so much less to do with the Republican Party than the Democratic Party in my mind.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Absolutely agreed.
It almost has nothing to do with the Republican Party other than just they brought it on themselves by going after Ron Paul as hard as they did. they created the opening for Trump to step into. And then ever since then, it's just been the DNC just stepping on their own feet and pissing on their shoes, man. They can't get out of their own way. It's kind of hilarious sometimes to watch, because every little thing that seems to happen, like the whole thing with Trump's AG allowing him to fire OIG, whether that's true or not, it's like if they had just appointed his selection, they'd still have their OIG people in there. And there'd be a number of other staff that they couldn't quite fire right away. They've expedited this. If y'all saw the RFK hearing today, like Elizabeth Warren, like totally stepped in it and basically came out as like a pro pharma company shill. Like it's just all of the worst looks that they could possibly make for themselves. They're constantly making for themselves. Like if they, even with like the California fire thing, if like Karen Bass and Gavin Newsom were just like a little bit more competent and it wasn't like the big thing it's turned into,
it didn't do a creepy press conference where he danced in front of a camera talking about reappropriating all that land that burned down.
I didn't
fucking
see
Lord,
that.
dude. Oh, it's a clip. I'll try to find it for you.
I'll look at it later.
But like almost every single error is like an unforced own goal. All Trump has to do is just be on the field and they just start like stabbing their own necks, man. It's awful. Unless, of course, you don't like them, in which case it's I can't stop laughing.
It's like, if not enemy, why shaped like enemy?
God. All right, I got a little 20-second clip for you.
Is it the Gavin Newsom thing?
It's the Newsom. Ooh, you know what? Hold on. I didn't share sound.
Mistakes.
Gotta have the sound.
Yeah, and I think this is like a week or two old, so it's not new. It's from like right around when the fires were still like big news.
All right, here you go.
I was just talking to Josh Green, the governor of down in Hawaii, who had some ideas around some land use concerns he has around speculators coming in, buying up property and the like. So we're already working with our legal teams to move those things forward, and we'll be presenting those in a matter of days, not just weeks.
I'm just talking to Josh Green. Grin on his face too.
Someone
so proud of himself.
The clip of the guy playing the drums and the cat's like, and he's in the background like,
and Gavin Newsom's doing this.
I mean, the giddiness, just from a human perspective, to like get that giddy a couple, maybe a week after these houses all burned down, and you're supposed to be the governor of these people, the elected official looking out for them, and you've got a shit-eating grin on your face, doing a little dance, talking to speculators and getting this land sold out. And man, this is gonna be a boon for the California economy.
Yeah, back then the Palisade fire was like 3% contained too. So he's doing that while the fire is still raging.
Still raging. It makes you wonder. It's like if there's any argument that they're actually not people and that they're like lizards occupying human skin. It's clips like that's like it's like, most of the time I poo-poo on that, but it's like maybe they actually are lizards, It's like that's
like it was the equivalent of that walk you do while you're carrying something heavy and your pants start to fall off a little bit. You kind of widen out. His human skin suit was slipping off in the back.
He was kind of like
wriggle back into his rubber suit a little bit.
Checks out. I mean, that makes as much sense as any, because it's either that or he is so devoid of any emotions that we associate with being a human. He might as well be like, if he's not a lizard, he might as well be.
Well, he has one emotion. He has a joy for money, obviously.
I would say if we were going to look at this as charitably as we possibly could, the only like real good explanation I can come up for that is he was just incredibly nervous in that moment. Maybe he was hoping they weren't going to ask him certain questions he didn't have answers to. Maybe he felt really unprepared, and like it just kind of comes out in like physical movement for him, But
like, thank God they asked me this question about screwing over the locals and making money off of it. I do know the answer to that.
But these are the locals that actually have like the resources to fight back. You know what I mean? Like it's not quite the poor people in Hawaii got burned out. It's like, oh, you mean like the richest demographic of the richest city in California just lost their houses? It's like, if anybody actually has the money to rebuild, it is them. So that's a tough battle to try to screw over. You know what I mean? It's a big uphill battle.
Well, the good
It's
news is,
tough.
are you going to win them over? Because they're not going to have to spend their money. We're going to spend a lot of California tax money revamping this
Get
smart
that
city out here that you
government
guys get to
Trump
live in now.
aid.
I do wonder how liquid all of those people were, because a lot of them were very house rich and land rich. That area appreciated quite a lot over the last 20 years. And from hearing some of the interviews of people who lived there, other than the fact that they happened to own a home that got to be worth quite a lot while their property taxes were being held low, I didn't really get the impression that most of them were like very liquid cash wise. And losing your biggest asset like that, you can't borrow against it anymore. So even if you've paid off your house, that equity is essentially worthless for the time being.
It's a really good point.
I don't really know how like actually wealthy many of them are. As much as easy as it is to look at that big house in the nice neighborhood and think.
That's
So,
fair. Well, that's
I don't know.
totally fair. So let's spend the last parts of this podcast. RFK, yay, nay on his confirmation. You think he gets through? And then what about Tulsi? Because I know that she's coming up. Like, you guys do you still feel good about RFK? You have reservations about it? What are your thoughts about these last two, kind of like, as the mainstream media calls them, uniquely disqualified cabinet positions?
RFK performed very well today, and a lot of the crowd who were there were very supportive of him at the end, like almost overwhelmingly so. However, it does feel like the Democrats are probably going to go pretty hard against him in terms of their votes. So if he's able to convert 5 of them, I think that would be pretty significant. He does have another hearing tomorrow as well with a different Senate committee. I think it's Committee on Housing, Health, something or other. The acronym is HELP, so I'm sure it's really gay.
It is HELP. Today was finance, tomorrow's HELP.
Gotcha. If that one goes very well as well, it's certainly possible he could grab a few votes, but he's generally viewed as an outsider, and I think that view is probably what's already made up the minds of most of the people who would be voting for him. Whereas I think Tulsi will have an easier time. Obviously, the Democrats aren't going to like that she's like switched parties, but I think they're going to give her the same kind of consideration they gave to Marco Rubio as like, oh, you're one of us, you were a representative, blah, 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 blah. So I think they'll actually let her squeak through pretty easy. I think RFK is going to be the tough one.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think it's harder to make the case that Tulsi's completely unqualified too. RFK has a couple of radical ideas on stuff that I think still are maybe pervasive enough to the average person that you can look at it and go like, this is and to be fair, he's got some character flaws that make me nervous about trusting him as a human being as well along the way. I was a big fan to start. And the more I look into RFK, specifically in his personal life, the more you're like, I don't know if this is an upstanding, trustworthy individual.
As his cousin called him, a predator. That's why he likes birds of prey, because he himself is a predator.
He's a predator. And I don't, and maybe there's something to be said about the effectiveness of putting a predator in certain positions that would be effective. Somebody with that kind of personality. But yeah, he is an individual that there's more, especially on kind of his personal side, that makes me a little bit nervous about what kind of person he really is. And to Kiefer's point as well, major outsider. I mean, this is a guy, he didn't just switch sides. He's the poster boy of talking shit about Democrats right now. So it's gonna be hard to sway many opinions on him, I think, from that side, because there is a lot of personal sentiment of disdain.
If there's ever like a redheaded stepchild of politics, it is him. Yeah, that's
ridiculous. I don't even have red hair.
There's something about that listening, and I was listening to it when I was in the gym today, and I had this very shallow moment where it's like, I just wish he could speak better.
Right.
It's like
talk faster.
Right. It's like your voice is just so abrasive. Like, I put it in the same category as like a high pitched Karen. Like, I don't want to listen
that Adam's apple when you talk,
It's just like anything he has to say. I'm just, like, as soon as he starts speaking, I'm like, don't care. Can't get past the raspiness.
Somebody said that to me early on when I was hoping he might be one of the candidates with some real viability. And it was a left-leaning friend of mine whose opinion I do respect, despite that, I guess. But she's very with it and very plugged in. And as I was making my case for him, she stopped me and said, "Yeah, but he has no shot because his voice is so bad." And I pushed back for about 10 seconds, and then I went, "You know what? If the opinion of somebody who's as well as informed as this person, who has good nuanced views and isn't one of these everything on the right's bad, everything on the left's good, but actually has an opinion I respect, and that's her view, then the guy whose IQ is 85 that's voting, who has done zero research, that's definitely his view."
For sure. It's a real thing. And it is a shame. I know that it probably sucks to get that throat disease. Yeah, I have the opposite take of you guys. I think that RFK is going to have the easier pathway through, only because what you guys talked about, like the senators, like Congress is telling on themselves. I think that everyone's going to tell on themselves when it comes to Tulsi. They're going to say, like, we are so pro-war and we are so pro-establishment that we can't abide by an anti-war director of national intelligence. I think that she has a much harder pathway because everybody is, the military industrial complex has got its fingers up all of those puppets' ass so deep that they're not going to be able to abide by anything outside of your traditional preconceived ex-CIA director to then take over the director of national intelligence. So I think that she's got a harder time. And I'm curious to see how the hearings go, because I feel like they're just be like, you're an Assad and Putin apologist. And, I think they're just going to really hammer her on reasonable takes to anybody that's anti-war.
I think they're going to have a tough time, though, because Tulsi ultimately has the same experience that they have. She was state representative, city council, vice chair of the DNC, and then a federal representative. What do you say if you're a federal representative and you're like, I think you're unqualified for a cabinet position with your decades as being a federal representative? It's like, I think it becomes very tough to couch these things in the kinds of reasonable pushback that would allow you to like protect your no vote. You can't tell yourself too much.
Yeah, I don't think that they're going to say that her public experience isn't enough. I think they're going to lean on those very few moments that, if you take out of context, look like she is a Russian asset. It's like, well, why did you go and meet with the dictator of Syria when he was known to have allegedly gassed his people and Obama drew a red line that didn't end up being true? But how do you explain your actions? I think it's going to be more of those type things. And I just feel, right, and I have nothing to back this up, this is my feeling, that she is going to get the Pete Hegseth treatment versus the Marco Rubio treatment, right? Marco Rubio, like watching those Senate here, like if you watch the Pete Hegseth confirmation versus Marco Rubio, dude, from the opening gavel, Marco was going to get confirmed. Everyone's talking about, oh, well, when you sat next to me and I was the junior senator and I had no idea what's going on, and myself, you know what I mean? Like everything about it was very kumbaya, because Marco Rubio is one of them versus Pete Hegseth, who is not one of them. And I think that if not enemy, why shaped like enemy will apply to Tulsi in her hearings, because she used to be one of them, but she is not anymore. She has forsaken anything, like any sort of like common allegiance that would bind them together. She has forsaken that. So they will look at her as like, well, if not terrorist, why look like terrorist?
That's a good point. I got to imagine the terrible industry that is preying on American people that takes precedence still over all the other is the military industrial complex. So to give you some credit for your argument, I mean, there probably is a good case to be made that that's a much bigger threat to the establishment, the shadow government, the money changing hands than is anything RFK is going to do about vaccines or red dye 40.
Yeah, I don't know. That's my feeling. I guess we'll see if it plays out. But I just feel like there is more support for anti-vax RFK than Tulsi. I think that she is a true outsider, like Pete Hegseth, but unlike Pete Hegseth, there is just like she crossed the line. Like she's just gone too far. She's gone too anti-war, too anti-establishment, because like Pete Hegseth falls in line in a lot of ways, right? This is a guy that I want to restore the warrior class. If I'm a defense contractor, fantastic. Let's go. Let's make the warrior class great again. Let's bring them back, dude. We've got some, let's boost up military standards and recruitment. Let's go get us some brown people somewhere. And I don't care if it's on the southern border of America. I don't care if it's in the war in the Middle East or the Chinese outside of Taiwan. Let's go get us some brown people.
As long as you need military vehicles and missiles, we're happy to help you.
Do you want to restore the warrior ethos to this country? Fantastic. My man, I'm all in support. Versus, kind of the anti-war stance that Tulsi has taken. So I think she's like the most outsider of all of the nominations.
It's an interesting take for sure. I mean, I definitely think there's a strong disdain and outsider sentiment to RFK just because of who he is. And I mean, probably punctuated by the fact that he's the outside of the black sheep of Democratic political royalty as well. You're not just an outsider. You betrayed us. You were supposed to be the chosen one.
They killed my uncle.
Well, Matt, would you like to take another $5 bet on this? I'm willing to bet that Tulsi has a relatively easier time getting appointed than RFK. And how would you like to define easier?
I was going to say, how do we define this?
Because
I will take your bet. Regardless of whatever parameters that we establish, I will still take your bet.
I will toss out if we're having any difficulty on a metric system, I'm happy to work in some arbitration role for this bet.
What if we just bet on how many votes they get in their confirmation?
Oh, just a simple, flat out, like, do you get 50? Do you get 55, 52? Who gets more?
If there's a tie, you win. I'll give you that as well.
Okay, I'll take it. I'll take it. I think that Tulsi will get less confirmation votes than RFK.
Okay. All right. I'm in. Let's see. When is her hearing? It was in February, right?
Is it that late?
February?
Oh, I guess February is a couple days away, though. I say, oh my God, it's so far away.
But it's
fast.
Pretty sure it's the end of February. Is when it's scheduled for. I only know
get away with pushing that one so far back, right? Don't these 17 intelligence agencies that are the backbone of the American foreign policy machine, don't they need a leader?
Yeah, you would think, but apparently the government works just fine when no one does anything for a month and a half.
Shocker. Whoa, so crazy.
Let's see. Yeah, I don't know if I'm finding the date here just yet. Oh, no, they're saying Thursday, which is still obviously next month.
In February.
Yeah, so it looks like it's maybe February 6th. They still don't have a date here yet. But it just says it's going to be on a Thursday. Okay, well, we'll figure it out later. And when the votes happens, I'm sure we will know.
Yeah, it'll be hard to miss.
That's fair.
I want my $5 back, man. Ross Ulbricht walked free 12 hours too late, and that was unacceptable.
Late.
It's
going to be hilarious when this is a tie again, and your own concessions while making the bet of Ross for another $5. You would just quit giving up the middle ground. You'd probably have both of these.
Yeah, but I'm just so confident that I don't even think it's going to be close enough where there's a tie. I think there will be a reasonable delta between the two.
Interesting. And I agree with that. I just think that the delta is in a different direction. It's like I agree with your statement, sir.
Well, I mean, it's totally chill because neither vote has happened just yet. So, I mean, I think we're both down with the terms right now, and if we lose, we lose. It is what it is.
This is my burden. Tis yours. But to be fair, my burden is not nearly as heavy as yours, sir. You walk this you walk this road alone.
I feel like we should, one, encourage more of these little show bets, but two, I think we should make the loss of a bet not a monetary thing necessarily. We should come up with some kind of fun thing for our viewers. Like maybe we should all invest in shock collars, and you got to take yourself a zap when you lose a bet. Start getting something that's fun for a podcast, you know.
Ooh. I mean, we had one of those last year. It's like last of used Drake's penis had to do how many shots?
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
It was
we
5
did have the
shots.
Drake penis bet.
That
Did
was
that
a
one
good
ever
one.
get uploaded, or is that one still hidden?
Oh,
on
that
your
one's
computer?
lost in the ether.
What do you mean lost? Is it gone?
Oh, it's
gone?
not. No, it's not lost. It's just stuck on my laptop.
Don't scare me, man.
No, it's not. It's not lost. It's just stuck on my laptop, like so many of.
I forgot all about the Drake penis bet, dude. That was.
Oh,
Somebody brought that up the other day, and I was halfway into that story before I was like, "Why am I telling people this story?" This is hilarious.
Yeah, you have no reason to tell anyone yet. It's not public.
no one knows exactly. Now you're just the weirdo that was looking at Drake's penis for unprompted
Why were you
and
looking at
talking
Drake's penis,
about
dude?
it.
That sentiment was the expression on this person's face I was telling the story to, for
They're
sure.
like,
It's like, what are you talking about, psycho?
oh, well.
I can't
On
believe you
that
remember
note, do you guys have anything else?
Nope.
I was
Logan?
gonna say maybe instead of a shot collar, if you really want to up the ante, we could do one of those OnlyFans chicks vibrator toys where you have to give the other guy the remote for the next episode, and you gotta sit there and squirm.
Does it work the
That's
same
awful.
for dudes?
And those toys existed before OnlyFans, Logan. They're not OnlyFans branded.
Fair enough. I'm gonna say that they don't work in the same way for dudes, but when that thing starts vibrating in your butthole, you're gonna have some kind of reaction that's gonna be funny on the
To be
podcast.
fair.
I am unwilling to put anything in my butthole for the podcast. I'll say that.
Wow, non-committal as usual.
Wow.
I'm so
What
brave.
what about around?
That's even worse,
On?
honestly.
What about on? Not in,
That's
but
probably
on.
just as bad. Probably just as bad. Like a
What
hemorrhoid
about
simulator.
same concept but vibrating cock ring?
I'm still not like
You're
totally
like,
cool.
I
with
just
giving
feel
all
like
this power.
the geoeconomic status.
Face
I
starts
told you I
getting
don't
red.
want to commit to the podcast. I'm an intermittent guest. You guys are asking me a lot of commitment questions.
The intermittent weekly guest. It's like, I just can't commit to things in my butthole. Fair enough. You know what I mean? If there's ever a line to draw, I respect it. Thank you very much for listening to Against the Mod podcast. We are a very serious podcast that talks about very serious things. Thank you very much. We appreciate you guys tuning in week in and week out. Find us on YouTube until we're canceled because I got another strike notification. And so it's only going to last for so long. And find us wherever you get your podcasts, all that good stuff. We appreciate you guys. Remember, we fight against the mob with people over politics. We'll see you next week.